Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Microphone check. Testing, 1, 2.
Good, how are you?
The Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement will come to order. I want to thank all of you for coming today. This is a new age for America, a new golden age, we all pray, and it's a privilege for all of us to have a small role in this crucial period in our history. I want to begin by welcoming the new members of the subcommittee. We have Russell Fry, who will be joining us shortly. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee, but this will be his first stint on the Subcommittee on Immigration. He's in his second term, a former Eagle Scout, and has his degree from the Law School of South Carolina. Glenn Grothman, also a veteran of the Judiciary Committee, served in the Wisconsin State Senate. His JD is from Wisconsin. Brad Knott, who is here as a freshman, worked as a prosecutor with a JD from Wake Forest. Bob Odner, who is here present, served in the Missouri State Senate with a JD from St. Louis University. Derek Schmidt, freshman from Kansas's 2nd District, former Attorney General of the state of Kansas, former Majority Leader of the Kansas Senate, and with a JD from Georgetown. And finally, Brandon Gill, freshman member from Texas, an investment banker. We welcome all of them to the subcommittee today. Our ranking member, Ms. Jayapal, is absent today because of the death of her father, and our hearts go out to her and her grieving family. She'll be represented today by our former chairman and ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Lofgren, to whom I'll yield to introduce the new Democratic member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have now on the subcommittee Mr. Nadler, Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Crockett, Mr. Cohen. I think they are new to the subcommittee. The other members have served before, and we're looking forward to a productive year. And with that, I would yield back for our opening statements.
Thank you. The subcommittee meets today to hear testimony to assist us in restoring integrity, security, and enforcement to our immigration laws, and we'll begin with opening statements. Our nation has just suffered the largest illegal mass migration in history, deliberately engineered, abetted, and encouraged by President Joe Biden and his allies in Congress. For 4 years, the American people have endured the effect of this calculated lawlessness. Schools flooded with non-English speaking students, hospitals packed with illegals demanding free health care, Americans pushed out of homeless shelters to make room for illegals, an estimated $150 billion a year taken from struggling American families to pay for free food, free legal services, free transportation, free housing, free clothing, free cell phones for all of those who have broken into our country. Millions of American workers have been displaced, driving down wages and drying up opportunities for our own young people. The deadly fentanyl trade coming across our open border now claims the lives of tens of thousands of Americans every year. And worst of all, among these illegal migrants have come the most violent, dangerous, and malevolent criminals and criminal gangs in the world, while sanctuary laws and democratic jurisdictions protect them as they prey on innocent Americans. Every immigration-related agency in Biden's executive branch had a part in destroying the integrity of our immigration system. I'll offer you just a few examples. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services did nothing to stop extensive fraud in mass parole programs that it implemented and delayed adjudication of legal immigration applications in favor of those for illegal aliens. The State Department gave U.S. taxpayer money to non-governmental organizations to hire foreign nationals to tell other foreign nationals how to circumvent U.S. immigration laws. The Department of Homeland Security refused to prevent fraud in visa programs and brought interior immigration enforcement to a standstill. Customs and Border Protection abused its authority by paroling in over 531,000 foreign nationals in just one categorical parole program. The Department of Health and Human Services ignored its duty to determine whether unaccompanied alien children who arrived at the border had criminal backgrounds and were in danger to themselves or others before releasing them into our country. The Office of Refugee Resettlement used taxpayer dollars to fund housing for illegal aliens. The Department of Justice told its immigration judges to stop adjudicating cases. And it reversed common-sense Trump-era opinions that prevented asylum fraud. Time and again, we were told by the Biden administration and congressional Democrats that our border was secure. We were told there was no national security or public safety risk. We were told the administration could do nothing more to prevent illegal immigration. But Americans knew better. And they finally got tired of feeling unsafe in their own towns, tired of seeing illegal aliens sleeping in their community schools, recreation centers, airports, and police stations, and tired of footing the bills for foreign nationals who showed nothing but contempt for U.S. law. And on November the 5th last year, they delivered a resounding victory to President Donald Trump with a clear and unambiguous mandate to stop this insanity. Yesterday, President Trump, within hours of returning to the presidency, issued 11 executive orders to once again secure our borders, recover our sovereignty, protect our people, and restore the rule of law. The wreckage of the Biden years will take many years to repair. Between the 6 million illegals deliberately trafficked into our country and another 2 million known gotaways who evaded an utterly overwhelmed Border Patrol, an illegal and unvetted population the size of the state of Washington has been ushered into our country. That population includes at least 99 terrorists that we know of, more than 1.4 million aliens who are right now defying court orders of removal, 7.6 million aliens on the ICE non-detained docket. President Trump's executive orders reinstate the successful Remain in Mexico program that had brought phony asylum claims to a trickle until Joe Biden abolished it on his first day in office. They revoke Biden's anti-enforcement executive orders and policies and make clear to the world that the only pathway into the United States is to obey our laws. And after the largest illegal mass migration in history, this administration must now undertake the largest repatriation operation in history. And I speak for every Republican on this committee, and I believe every Republican in this Congress when I say we will stand behind him in this necessary work. This Congress must not only give President Trump the tools to restore our national sovereignty, but we must also enact laws so that a future Democratic president cannot once again throw our borders wide open. We need to reform our asylum laws to ensure that only legitimate claims will be honored. We must close the loopholes that allowed Biden to abuse the limited parole authority that Congress gave him. We must revamp our unaccompanied minor laws to prevent human trafficking that ran rampant under Biden, and we must rescue the hundreds of thousands of children that Biden and his administration simply lost track of. We must restore integrity to our temporary and permanent visa programs so that only those who are an asset to America can take advantage of them. Much of that work will fall to this subcommittee, and all of that work begins today. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses to help us chart that path. And with that, I yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Immigration to the United States has played an important role over the centuries in making America a vibrant, prosperous, and successful country. But it is broadly agreed that our current immigration system is broken. We need to make necessary reforms and then vigorously enforce the law. We need to provide the resources necessary to secure the border and provide that only those who are permitted entry to the United States are, in fact, so admitted. The resources should include adequate personnel, technology, and other tools to allow for the orderly entry of only those who secured the proper permission for entry. But we also need to change the law, to reform the law. And when we look to the administration, I think sometimes we should look in the mirror, because the necessary reform of immigration law is a failure of Congress. We have tried over the years to improve the law, and in every case have failed. With our immigration system broken and no longer functioning as it was once intended, change is necessary. Now, I would include that from families separated due to overly punitive laws to a dysfunctional employment-based system mired in unworkable backlogs, to a lengthy and overly complex asylum process that has been exploited by transnational criminal organizations preying upon the desperate. The Immigration and Nationality Act screams for reform. The failure to do that, I believe, as the chairman has indicated, did lead to an election of someone who promised to engage in mass deportations, which I don't believe is necessarily the answer to the challenge that we face. Without reform of the law, the executive is now trying to use a section of the law, 212F, in a way that it was probably never intended, and in the past, the courts have disallowed. The frustration with our immigration border problem has also led the president to engage in a direct attack on the Constitution. The 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That's pretty clear. And there's, going back to the adoption of this amendment, there's never been a question about if you're born here, you're an American, but there's a direct assault on that. And the idea that this is being done in the effort to preserve public safety, I think is belied by the other executive action taken by the president just yesterday, where the President Trump pardoned hundreds of felons who violently attacked police officers on January 6th. The decision to release violent criminals into our community makes America less safe. More than 1,500 criminals were pardoned, including, and I'll just mention three, Steve Cappuccio, who ripped off Officer Daniel Hodges' gas mask and beat him in the face while he was stuck in a door, and the attack was so violent that Cappuccio held his phone in his mouth so he could beat Officer Hobbs with both hands. DJ Rodriguez, who joined a mob attacking Officer Michael Fanone and repeatedly shocked him in the neck with a taser, causing him to lose consciousness and suffer a heart attack. And David Dempsey, who climbed over other rioters to get officers where he stomped on at least one officer's head, beat officers with a flagpole, a crutch, and a broken piece of furniture, and sprayed officers' faces with pepper spray. Don't tell me that the motivation for immigration crackdown is public safety when we release these violent criminals back into our communities. Mr. Chairman, as you know, I used to teach immigration law, and I well understand the need for reform. But I do hope that we will require executive actions to comply with existing law and turn our attention to the necessary reforms that is really our province here in the United States Congress. And with that, I yield back.
The chair is now pleased to recognize the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the chairman was exactly right in his opening statement. On day one of the Biden administration, they made three decisions. They said, we're no longer going to build the wall. We're no longer going to have remain in Mexico. And when you get to our border, you will not be detained. You will be released. And guess what? Everybody came. It was deliberate. It was intentional. It was premeditated. They did it to the country. And now it's time to fix that, as the chairman pointed out. I mean, think about it. What they said was no wait, no wall, no detention. Everybody came. And we shouldn't be surprised that who wouldn't want to come to the greatest country ever? But you got to do it legally. That's the problem. And so yesterday, the president started what the American people said to do on November 5th. He started with those 11 executive orders that the chairman talked about. And this hearing is to highlight what took place over the last 4 years and what we have to do to fix the problem the American people elected us to fix. So I appreciate the good work our chairman has done over these last several years. Good work he did on H.R. 2, the work he's doing with this key subcommittee on this key issue. This is critically important, and our job, one of our jobs, this is reconciliation, we Republicans understand this, is to make sure we have the funds available to execute and get accomplished the executive orders the administration, the president put in place over the last 24 hours. So that's our task, and I appreciate, again, the work of this committee, our staff, and our great chairman of this key subcommittee. With that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jamie Raskin of Maryland, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. the chairman began by saying the point here is to restore the rule of law. Restore the rule of law. Can you even pretend to do that if you stand by and support Donald Trump, who on day one, as the chairman of the committee just said, day one of his presidency, pardoned 1,500 insurrectionists, including hundreds of people who violently assaulted and attacked American police officers? Let's just take one person who is free today, Julian Cater, who had been convicted after having every due process protection, the right to counsel, the right to cross-examine witnesses, the right to introduce evidence, but they had him completely. They knew exactly what happened. Most of this was videotaped so the whole world could see it. Well, Julian Cater repeatedly, violently assaulted our officer protecting us in Congress, Officer Brian Sicknick, who then proceeded to have several strokes and died on January the 7th, 2021, the next day. The family of Officer Sicknick is absolutely devastated and demolished by what's just happened. I invite any of my colleagues, including the members new to this committee who maybe weren't here on January 6th and didn't experience the trauma of that violent insurrection when we saw a mob marauding through here yelling, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," and looking to assassinate Nancy Pelosi. And now you have the temerity to come forward and say this is about public safety? How much safer are we now with these 1,500 criminals at large in Washington, D.C. and going out into the country? Are you vouching that these people are not going to be attacking any other police officers? Are you vouching that they're no longer a threat to public safety? What an outrage, what a scandal. Well, the hearing has been called not on trying to deal with the public safety crisis created by the president on day one of his presidency, but on immigration. Now, time and again, Democrats have reached across the aisle to fix our immigration system by finding common ground through compromise. We did it in 1986 with a Democratic-led House and a Republican-led Senate when we passed the immigration reform signed into law by President Reagan 4 decades ago. In 2013, under President Obama, Democrats worked with Senate Republicans on a sweeping immigration reform bill, only to have House Republicans kill it because it threatened Speaker Boehner's grip on power. Last year, under President Biden, Democrats worked with Republican Senator Lankford to produce a tough border security deal with increased border patrol, with increased border technology, with increased asylum judges at the border, but President Trump and House Republicans openly and aggressively tanked the deal. They sank the ship, openly rejecting a bipartisan border agreement hailed by the most conservative Republicans in the Senate because they preferred to have a security crisis to run on than an actual border solution. And yet, as Democrats, we stand ready again to work with our colleagues to fix the broken immigration system. Today, unlawful crossings at the border are much lower than they were when President Trump left office. We made progress. Now is the time for us to tackle the daunting task of finding compromise and pragmatic solutions to fix the system that has not been updated in decades, a system that relegates millions of people to the shadows and leaves other people in limbo. Let's secure the border. Let's make it a lot harder to get into America illegally and a lot easier to get into America lawfully. That's what America wants to see. Let's not use immigration to destroy our Constitution. Unbelievable that a lot of my friends on the other side of the aisle are sitting by idly while Donald Trump proposes by executive order to destroy Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, which establishes that everybody born in the United States is a citizen of the United States. And yet, they just let that go. All of these originalists and textualists who claim to care about what the Constitution stands for, that was the whole purpose and meaning of the 14th Amendment, and now they want to destroy birthright citizenship in America, moving to a citizenship based on race instead of a citizenship based on place, which was the whole purpose of the 14th Amendment, to overturn the Dred Scott decision. Well, we're obviously going to have some differences moving forward because they don't want real solutions. They just want to demagogue the immigration issue. That doesn't move America forward. It's just like they demagogued the issue of inflation. They said they were going to bring down prices in rent, in utilities, energy costs. They said they were going to bring down the price of groceries. Not a single peep from them about that on day one. No, it's just about releasing all the violent insurrectionists, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who are out there today saying that they want revenge. That's the real program for America. But let's hear what their specific proposals are about immigration. If they make sense, then we will get behind them. But if it's just more demagoguery, Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid we're going to have to let it pass. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for reminding all of us why the people voted as they did on November the 5th. The chair would now ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner, be permitted to sit on the dais for this hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record, and we'll now introduce today's witnesses. We have with us today, no stranger to this subcommittee, Mr. John Fabbricatore. Mr. Fabbricatore is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
Ma'am,
For what purposes of general
I just wanted to confirm that the member sitting in can only ask questions if he's yielded time. Isn't that our rule? Okay.
That's the rule.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mr. John Fabbricatore is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation and an advisory board member with the National Immigration Center for Enforcement. Mr. Fabbricatore started with the Immigration and Naturalization Service in 1998. He retired from the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2022. He served in many different positions, including Deputy Field Office Director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the Denver, Colorado area of responsibility before being promoted to Field Office Director in 2020. Mr. Grant Newman is the Director of Government Relations for the Immigration Accountability Project, a nonpartisan organization that analyzes current and proposed federal immigration policies to educate the public and hold elected officials accountable to their oath and to defend the United States and its citizens. Mr. Newman has worked in immigration policy since 2012, most recently at Numbers USA Education and Research Foundation. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Christopher Newport University and his Juris Doctorate from Regent University School of Law. Mr. David Bier is the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. He has a BA in Political Science from Grove City College in Pennsylvania. And then finally, we have Ms. Jessica Vaughan. She is the Director of Policy Studies for the Center on Immigration Studies. Her area of expertise is immigration policy and operations, covering topics such as unaccompanied alien children, visa programs, immigration benefits, and immigration enforcement. Ms. Vaughan has a master's degree from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree from Washington College in Maryland. I want to welcome our witnesses, thank them for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Please know your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we will begin with Mr. Fabbricatore. Oh, could you turn on your microphone?
Good morning, Chairman McClintock and Congresswoman Lofgren and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the privilege of appearing before you today to discuss the urgent need to address dangerous sanctuary jurisdictions, improve interior immigration enforcement, and recommit to policies that protect American citizens. Over the past 4 years, the erosion of immigration enforcement has had devastating consequences for our communities. Sanctuary policies, the abuse of prosecutorial discretion, and overwhelmed court dockets have created a system that shields criminal aliens and jeopardizes public safety. I want to emphasize one key point today. Weak border and immigration enforcement policies have allowed unvetted and dangerous criminal illegal aliens to enter and thrive within our borders, leaving Americans at risk, such as the case involving a Venezuelan criminal alien who crossed illegally in El Paso, Texas, and was released into the U.S. in 2023. He was charged with raping a 14-year-old girl while he was living in his employer's basement in Colorado. He had been arrested previously for possessing tools for forgery and counterfeiting and larceny, but was released without notifying ICE. Sanctuary jurisdictions claim to protect immigrant communities, but they do the opposite. They shelter criminal aliens, accommodating and increasing crimes like drug trafficking, violent assaults, and human trafficking. One stark example is the Tren de Aragua gang. This violent group infiltrated Colorado, where their crimes range from jewelry store robberies to deadly shootings. I witnessed the aftermath firsthand in Aurora, Colorado, where gang members terrorized an apartment complex. Residents lived in fear as armed criminals roamed freely, culminating in horrific violence and murder. Despite law enforcement efforts, these issues persist because sanctuary policies actively hinder the sharing of information and cooperation with ICE. Sanctuary officials ignore ICE detainers, release violent offenders back into communities, and undermine the public trust in the justice system. A mother and her teenage son were killed by an illegal alien and repeat DUI offender in Colorado last December. They are just one of the many tragic consequences of this leniency. ICE data underscores the crisis. Nearly 7.8 million illegal aliens are on the non-detained docket, freely roaming American communities, including 1.4 million with final orders of removal, and even 13,000 individuals convicted of murder. Not only that, the dismissal of 700,000 immigration cases and administrative failures in another 200,000 cases are examples of the prior administration's opposition to enforcing immigration laws. The spread of criminal networks is also alarming. Cartels like Sinaloa and Jalisco exploit sanctuary policies to flood our communities with fentanyl and other lethal drugs. Last year alone, law enforcement seized more than 115 million fentanyl pills. Yet availability remains unchanged, showing that these cartels continue to operate with impunity. We must return to enforcing immigration laws passed by Congress. This includes 1, holding criminals accountable by reinstating ICE detainers and ensuring dangerous individuals are detained and deported. 2, safeguard American families by dismantling the gangs and cartels that threaten our neighborhoods. 3, strengthen the rule of law by fostering cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement. Unfortunately, the Biden administration's policies eroded the effectiveness of interior enforcement. This leniency sent a dangerous message, encouraging illegal crossings while undermining the tools ICE needs to apprehend and remove criminal aliens. The results are evident in the tragic rise of fentanyl deaths, human trafficking, and violent crime linked to foreign-born cartels and gangs. Reversing these policies is not just an option, it's a necessity. We must empower ICE, restore cooperation with state and local enforcement, and invest in the resources that prioritize U.S. citizens' safety and well-being. Members of Congress, our community's safety and our nation's stability depend on decisive action. Your top priority right now should be delivering the resources needed to assist the Trump administration in arresting, detaining, and removing illegal aliens. I urge you to preempt sanctuary policies and reinstate effective interior enforcement tools so that we can turn this vision into reality. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair is now pleased to recognize Mr. Grant Newman for 5 minutes.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and members of the subcommittee, Congresswoman Lofgren. Thank you for holding this important hearing at a pivotal moment for immigration enforcement. Through action and inaction, the Biden administration invited the border crisis of the past 4 years, and the world was listening. During the first 4 years of the Trump administration, CBP encountered just over 3 million inadmissible aliens nationwide. By comparison to the Biden administration, CBP encountered nearly 11 million inadmissible aliens. In addition to implementing mass catch and release of illegal aliens with notices to appear and report, the Biden administration illegally initiated the systematic processing of inadmissible aliens into the United States under the guise of humanitarian parole and issued them all open market employment authorization. Under the CHNV program, more than 531,000 otherwise inadmissible aliens from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela received permission to fly over the border to American airports and disappear into the country's interior and from border enforcement statistics. It was ended Monday. Under the CBP-1 app, the administration encouraged illegal aliens to schedule their illegal entry at ports. Over 2 years, more than 936,000 aliens did just that. It was also ended Monday. Despite the law only allowing parole on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, the Biden administration granted categorical parole and work authorization to more than 1.46 million inadmissible aliens in those 2 parole programs alone. Restoring integrity to our immigration system needs to begin with ending the rampant abuse of immigration law. Clearly, parole abuse is one of the most egregious. Humanitarian parole cannot continue to be used by administrations to get around statutory limits, all the while they claim to have made illegal immigration safe and lawful. Similarly, endless renewals and redesignations of temporary protected status have resulted in an eligible population that could exceed 1.2 million, with the Biden administration making more than 338,000 eligible in the last 9 months alone. Not only can illegal aliens receive TPS and work authorization, we have countries that have been continuously designated since the 90s because of a hurricane. Despite our government claiming it's not safe to return nationals to TPS countries, we continue to grant non-immigrant visas with an obligation to return to nationals from every single one of them. That defies logic. TPS abuse must end. On the border, the Remain in Mexico program significantly reduced illegal entries, even though less than 68,000 aliens were sent back to Mexico over the 2 years it was fully implemented. President Trump has rightfully ordered its reinstatement. The truth is that vast majority of illegal aliens are coming here for economic opportunities. If people understand they won't get in, they won't come. If their friends, family members, NGOs, and cartels can credibly promise an easy path to be released into the United States, they will come, and they have. Perception of the enforcement of immigration law matters enormously, and the statistics show that. For those on the interior, the credible threat of removal has the same effect. If they believe that the United States will no longer turn a blind eye to illegal immigration, illegal aliens will decide to return home. In addition to the reinstatement of Remain in Mexico, the end of parole and TPS abuse, and mass deportations, expanding expedited removal, regulations to address asylum fraud, visa sanctions for countries that won't take back their nationals, worksite enforcement, safe third country agreements, the broad restrictions found in the INA can all be combined to restore integrity to the immigration system. However, the American people can't continue to endure the whiplash every 4 years from administrations dramatically changing immigration enforcement and endless lawsuits. Congress has plenary power over immigration and an obligation to fix it. The Lake and Riley Act is a helpful step to give state attorneys general the better tools to respond to lawless administrations. Reforming and restricting parole, asylum, and the handling of unaccompanied children is essential. When someone arrives at the border illegally, the executive branch should be limited to 3 options: detain, return, or remove. Mandatory E-Verify for all employers can eliminate the job magnet for illegal immigrants. These solutions were passed by Congress last year in H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. Congress needs to finish the job. Additionally, TPS should be reformed statutorily to prevent further abuse and endless extensions. Finally, Congress needs to provide sufficient resources, including ICRO officers and detention beds, to carry out interior enforcement. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Mr. David Bier.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Lofgren, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For nearly half a century, the Cato Institute has produced original research showing that a freer, more orderly, and more lawful immigration system benefits Americans. Unfortunately, from January 2017 to January 2021, the U.S. immigration system underwent an assault unlike any in modern history. President Trump abused his authority to cut legal immigration from abroad by nearly 80%, refugees by 92%. He shut down asylum even for legal crossers. He stopped enforcing the law. He removed requirements to target public safety threats in the interior. As a result, he released twice as many convicted criminals as President Biden. He forced U.S. attorneys to prioritize misdemeanor family separation prosecutions of parents over sex offenders. By the time President Biden took office, the U.S. immigration system was in shambles. Immigration courts, consulates, ports of entry, all shuttered. Even detention centers were at half capacity. Many Border Patrol agents were assigned away from the border. Human trafficking investigators were working on low-level visa overstay cases. In December 2020, Border Patrol arrests were at the highest level for any December back to 1999. Evasions of Border Patrol were 75% higher than when President Trump entered office. Border Patrol was told not to impose consequences on crossers beyond expelling them to Mexico under Title 42 of the Health Code. A decade of progress on deterring criminals from crossing reversed. Encounters with convicted criminals tripled under the Trump administration. President Trump cut legal immigration. He increased illegal immigration, especially by criminals. After this 4-year sabotage, President Biden had to rebuild the immigration system from scratch. I criticize Biden's effort, but the fact is that it was always going to take time to undo this absolute disaster with no help from Congress and active obstruction by the states. He reprioritized public safety threats in the interior and cut releases of convicted criminals from detention in half. He refocused on border security, doubling detention, removing 3 times as many border crossers as President Trump. But it was fixing legal immigration that contributed to ending the crisis. Biden restored visa and refugee processing to above 2016 levels. Biden also deregulated the parole process to open this lawful pathway to allow asylum seekers to enter in a lawful and orderly way. Biden's approach was working. Yes, overall crossings increased during the economic recovery, but Border Patrol encounters were down 33% in Biden's final months compared to Trump's final months. Criminal crossings had fallen 57%. Evasions of Border Patrol were down 42%, falling immediately after President Biden reversed Trump's expulsion to Mexico policy. For the first time ever, most immigrants coming to the U.S. border were applying to enter legally through a regulated and screened lawful pathway. But the new administration is already undoing all the progress. The slew of new executive orders mandate violations of the U.S. Constitution, target peaceful people over violent felons, and by limiting legal immigration, encourage illegal immigration. The president has ordered violations of the Constitution's 14th Amendment, denying the legitimacy of millions of Americans, their citizenship, and threatening to deport babies born in America. He is threatening to use the military to arrest, detain, and remove people without proving to courts they are removable. His orders explicitly declare that he is above U.S. law, and he asserts he can ignore any immigration law that you, members of Congress, write. The president may have joked he wanted to be a dictator for a day, but he is not one. You, Congress, should defend your powers and the U.S. Constitution and our rights before they're gone. America's immigrants are with you. They come because America is the land of the free. Let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll finally hear from Ms. Jessica Vaughan.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to focus today on the most important things that Congress should do to restore immigration enforcement and integrity in our immigration laws, the areas of the law that need to be updated. The Border Security Act of 2023, or H.R. 2, is a great start, but more is needed to close loopholes and abuses and to fix the things in the law that just do not work and to address new challenges. I particularly want to focus on problems in certain visa and benefit programs. One problem is fraud. Fraud is often overlooked in discussions of immigration enforcement, but it really is another form of illegal immigration. Past reports have identified double-digit fraud in certain benefit programs, but most have never been studied or assessed for the prevalence of fraud. Congress needs to demand some investigation into these programs, audits, and benefit fraud assessments to find out just how prevalent it is. An even bigger problem is that over time, our immigration law has become a massive, disorganized menu of entry and work permit programs, some created by Congress, some not, that operates almost on autopilot. And in the hands of an administration like the previous one that wanted no limits on immigration, any integrity guardrails were dismantled. And these programs have now ballooned in size. In some cases, the rules themselves do not allow for meaningful controls. Some of these programs simply need to be shut down. Before I talk about that, I just want to endorse the comments made by my fellow panelists on the need to address sanctuaries, which are a major public safety threat and undermine the integrity of immigration laws. But I also want to mention that it's important to allow for a role for state and local officials in restoring integrity of our immigration programs and in enforcement. In some of the programs that I'm going to talk about, the states are really a gatekeeper to some of these programs, and so they have a stake in how they are run. And enforcement is not just a matter of imposing consequences on those who break the law. We need to be more prudent in administering visa and green card programs to reduce opportunities for abuse, either by unqualified applicants or by an administration that opposes limits on immigration. Visa overstaying is a chronic problem. More than 565,000 people overstayed their visa or visa waiver in 2023, and the State Department has done nothing but let this problem get worse in the last few years. Besides lenient entry programs, our immigration system offers too many opportunities for people to prolong their stay and obtain work permits, whether through long-term pretend temporary status or in programs that are a bridge to green cards and citizenship. And I'm referring to programs like TPS, OPT, Special Immigrant Juvenile Program, and the UNT visa programs for crime victims. All of these are loosely regulated and attract large numbers of fraudulent and frivolous applications. All of them have ballooned in size to historic numbers of applicants in the last 4 years. Collectively, these number at least 1.5 million and maybe as many as 2 million people, and that exceeds the size of all the other guest worker programs combined. For example, the OPT programs were never authorized by Congress, but allow hundreds of thousands of foreign students and foreign grads of U.S. schools or fake schools to get a work permit. The UNT visas for crime victims have proven to be mostly ineffective in helping prosecute crimes and need to be replaced with a more tightly managed deferred action program that suits the needs of law enforcement agencies. Similarly, the Special Immigrant Juvenile Program, which was sold as a humanitarian benefit for trafficked kids in need of protection, has become an amnesty program for young adults whose claims of abandonment or abuse are often not subject to thorough examination. The availability of this benefit, which has few controls or standards, creates demand that gets larger and larger every year. These are just a few examples of things that can be fixed by Congress and that I hope you will take up in this next session. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for your testimony. We'll now proceed to questions under the 5-minute rule, and we'll begin with Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is ludicrous for the ranking member of the subcommittee to make the argument that millions of illegal aliens who crossed into the country during the Biden administration invaded the country because the immigration system is, quote, broken, close quote. The fact is, these individuals came because of Biden's open border policies: no fence, no detention, no removal, and frankly, no enforcement. That's what happened. It is rich to decry the pardons of President Trump, yet failed to even insult, discuss, address places like San Diego, which have just become a super sanctuary city or the California state itself with its sanctuary policies. I submit for the record a story about a sanctuary city dweller suffering sexual battery, stranger rapes, murders at the hands of illegal aliens in California.
Without objection.
It is almost silly to say that the Senate plan, which would have allowed 7,500 people a day into the country before the president had to take any executive action at all, would have been a panacea to Biden's failed policies. And it is unique, and perhaps we're fortunate that an individual as the ranking member of the entire committee is able to condemn pardons, presidential pardons, as the only person that I know of on this dais who's actually received a presidential pardon for his actions. The Wong Kim Ark case, which basically addressed birthright citizenship, was given because somebody was a permanent legal resident, not illegal aliens who have a child in this country. When this gets to the Supreme Court, they're going to rule that way. And I'll be right, unlike Mr. Bier, who made his prediction on President Trump's policies when the Supreme Court upheld his policies. To say that the country's border was in a shambles when President Trump was there is ludicrous. Apparently, not looking at any of the numbers, such as in Yuma. In Yuma, the entire last year, the numbers were about 8,600, I believe it was. That was the total encounters. When it was not unusual under the Biden administration to have 8,600 encounters in a weekend. Ludicrous argument, specious. The numbers came down. Why did they come down? Because you didn't count people who were applying under CBP One app. You didn't count people who were getting the CHNV program. So if you're not counting everybody, well, of course the numbers come down. And that's where we sit here today. The law is this, Mr. Fabbricatore. An asylum requester is required to remain in custody until that asylum request is adjudicated. Is that not true?
Absolutely, sir. That's the way it should be.
Well, not just what it should be, that's
the way
the
the
law.
law is written. Yes, sir.
No administration has been successful at doing that because there's a massive number of asylum requests.
Correct.
But under this administration, how many asylum requesters have been released into the country?
Too many, sir. They're just released into the country and not put into detention as they should be.
If they were actually detained by the way the law requires, in which President Trump says he wants to do, he wants to enforce the law, what does that do to incentives to come into this country illegally?
It magnetizes it. It just forces people to come in because they know they're not going to go into detention. They know they're going to get released into the interior of the U.S.
If you're not detaining him, that's
Yes.
the magnet. But if you do detain him, it becomes a deterrent.
It becomes a deterrent. If we put detention back into action and we say we're going to detain you when you are asking, that's going to be a deterrent.
If you remove people, like you have 1.4 million who have who are actively in the country with removal orders, that doesn't count all the 500,000 plus criminal individuals. That is just the 1.4 who've had due process.
Yes.
If you begin removing people, what does that do as a deterrent or a magnet?
Again, it deters people from coming. And look, the biggest problem with this is they broke into the country, they entered illegally, they had an opportunity to see an immigration judge. That immigration judge ordered them deported, and they still did not leave the United States. So compounding just breaking our laws, even doubly so, by not even listening to what the immigration judge had to say.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but may I put some articles in for...
Under unanimous consent request?
Yes, thank you. An article, what Democrats must learn from Biden's disastrous immigration record. Dems finally admit Biden botched border after 2024 election loss. We destroyed ourselves. This one without title by CNN Politics, and then this one, which I've marked all over the back of. I apologize for that. Quantifying why Democrats support open borders, and I will submit additional UCs without reading them regarding sanctuary cities and the release of violent criminals into the community. I have probably 50 or more articles I will submit for the record, sir.
Without objection? Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think all of us acknowledge that the asylum system broke down. The system was overwhelmed, and I think it's worth noting that a majority of those who sought asylum in immigration court lost their asylum case. So clearly, people who are not eligible for asylum were admitted to the United States. Now, why is that a problem in the law? Well, Section 208 of A says this is a law that Congress wrote. Any alien who's physically present in the United States or who arrives in the United States, whether or not at a designated port of arrival, and including an alien who's brought to the United States after having been interdicted in international or U.S. waters, irrespective of such alien status, may apply for asylum. That's what the law that we wrote, and people responded to it, and in such numbers that the system broke down. We have never provided enough money to detain everybody who's seeking for asylum. We not during the first Trump administration, not during Biden, and not now. And so I think we need to address this issue in addition to other elements of immigration law that are not functioning properly. Mr. Bier, 208A1 provides this really expansive opportunity for people to come and apply. It broke down. Now Trump has tried to use 212F of the Act basically to override the law. My recollection is that when he tried that before, he lost in court. Can you enlighten us on that?
Yeah, that's right. 212F is about limiting the entry of people. 208A is about asylum. It's about applying for a benefit in the United States for people who are already present in the country. So it's not, 212F does not override the asylum law that you all wrote, explicitly allowing people to enter regardless of how they entered the country.
And so the law is such that if you come in between the ports of entry, say surreptitiously, you're present in the U.S., 208A allows you to apply, correct?
That's right. It doesn't matter the manner or the status that you have, you can apply for asylum.
For one, I think Congress ought to revisit that, and I think it's very clear the system has not worked, and that we ought to have a different, asylum is important. There are some people who are seeking refuge. This asylum was adopted by all civilized countries after World War II, and there is an infamous case of Jews escaping Germany who were refused entry to the United States and by Canada. They were sent back to Germany, and most of them were killed in concentration camps. And most civilized countries adopted asylum rules subsequent to that war. That's important, but it's important also that it's for asylees, not people who are seeking, economic opportunity. I don't dislike or hate someone seeking economic opportunities, but they're not asylees. So Congress itself needs to address this issue, put some order so that we can have order at the border, and then if we have a need for people who are meeting economic needs in this country, there needs to be a more orderly way to deal with that as well. Let me just quickly ask you, if you can, there was an assertion that the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what it says. Can you address the 14th Amendment question for us, Mr. Bier?
Yeah, so the 14th Amendment says anyone born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is a U.S. citizen. And the subject to, what the executive order says is that all of these people who are children of guest workers or children of people without legal permanent resident status or citizenship are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which is flatly absurd. That would mean they weren't here illegally. That would mean they're not subject to U.S. law like a diplomat who has diplomatic immunity. Obviously, they didn't think through the implications of making that kind of declaration. It's totally out of line with everything, all other constitutional interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. Bier, and my time has just about expired, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bier, what year was the 14th Amendment ratified?
In the 1860s.
1868. Doesn't that sound correct? And that was after which war?
The Civil War.
Which was done to end slavery, which preserve the Union and end slavery, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Did the American immigration system become better under the Biden administration?
It improved, yes.
The immigration system in America became better during the Biden years.
Correct.
Ms. Vaughan, is the Secretary of State required to halt visas for recalcitrant countries?
They're not required to. They have the authority to do that if they get a request from the Department of Homeland Security to do so because a country will not take their citizens back or doesn't cooperate in getting travel documents to return them after deportation.
Are there countries like that that are recalcitrant?
Yes, there are, quite a few.
Name a couple of the worst offenders.
Cuba, Venezuela, China, India and Bangladesh don't always cooperate. Iran.
Has the State Department over the last few years done their job to stop those recalcitrant countries from dumping criminals into our country and then not taking them back?
No, the State Department historically has been very reluctant to use visa sanctions to impose consequences on countries that are not fulfilling their international obligation to take their citizens back.
So should we be going to the administration and Secretary Rubio and insisting that they do that, or should we make a law change?
Well, I think it would help to make a law change to say that the Secretary must act in certain situations as defined by Congress to address recalcitrant countries and give even more tools besides visa sanctions, like potentially withholding foreign assistance or other diplomatic tools, to require the Secretary to do so. I mean, it may be that Secretary Rubio would want to do that, but there are not always going to be administrations that want to push this issue. So if Congress changes the law, then they will have that obligation.
So you would suggest we should make it a requirement?
Yes.
Mr. Newman, in regards to categorical parole, the Mariana Islands, the CNMI, they have a program like that where there's no visa needed for people to be able to come in. Isn't that a version of birthright citizenship?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's become a major issue, birth tourism in CNMI, people just basically coming in to get U.S. citizenship.
So you have Chinese nationals coming in to this territory, and they're able to have a child there, and the child becomes a citizen.
Yeah, it's absurd. It shouldn't exist in a modern civilization.
Doesn't that seem like that could be a national security threat with all we know about communist China?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from the Wall Street Journal, December 22nd, 2017, in regards to this issue.
Without objection?
Mr. Fabbricatore, hope I got your name right there. Can I just, some people just call you Fab, don't
Yes,
they?
sir.
We know all about the NGOs, including like the International Organization for Migration, IOM, which I saw when I was down at Panama 4 years ago and saw them processing people in. Don't they get significant amounts of money from the taxpayers of the United States?
They absolutely do, sir. They get a huge amount of money.
Do you have any ideas in the tens of millions?
It's tens of millions, yeah, higher than tens of millions.
And they've been a vital link, haven't they, in this whole process of illegal immigration into America. I mean, we talk about the cartels and the horrible things that they do, but don't those NGOs also serve as haven't they served as a vital link over the last 4 years of being able to bring people illegally into America?
Yes, sir. They have aided in helping illegal immigration enter into the United States.
Should we pull the money back from those organizations that have assisted in illegal immigration?
Yes, we should pull it back and use that money to help us with our deportation process.
If we're not able to pull that money back, should we have them help us reverse the flow and perhaps turn them into repatriation centers?
That sounds like it would be the right thing to do, sir.
Mr. Chairman, The era of America last is over, as you said in your opening remarks, and it's time to enforce the laws here in the United States of America. I yield back.
You'll get no argument from me on that point, Mr. Tiffany. Chair now recognize Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bier, just to be clear, you're with the Cato Institute, which my Republican colleagues generally love and are always quoting you and talking about you whenever we're talking about budget or fiscal affairs or so on. They don't like what you're saying about immigration today, and they certainly don't like your message, although I think they were completely stymied and flabbergasted when you said that things had improved marginally under President Biden, but had gone way south under Donald Trump. Explain why immigration policy was such a nightmare in the first Trump administration.
Well, we basically didn't have an immigration system by the end of the Trump administration. I mean, he basically banned all immigration from abroad, legal immigration from abroad, refugees down 92%, immigrant visas down 78%, non-immigrant visas down 80%. We basically didn't have an immigration system available to people at the end of the Trump administration. And if you look at what happened with convicted criminals crossing the border, the lack of focus on prioritization of convicted criminals in the interior, yes, the immigration system under the Trump administration led to a disaster. And ultimately, it took 4 years, but the Biden administration improved things significantly from the end of the Trump administration.
So the new Trump administration inherits a situation that's better in terms of unlawful crossings. What is going to be the effect of all of these executive orders at this point? It seems almost like they're calculated to produce more chaos.
Absolutely. He's trying to get rid of the legal channels by which people come into the country. He got rid of the refugee program day one. He got rid of the parole processes that allow people to enter legally on day one. He said, we're not going to do any kind of asylum, even for people who are entering the country legally. If you do that, what's the alternative? It's illegal immigration. And really, as long as we have illegal immigration, it's going to be a major touch point politically.
All right, so let's say that he actually turns the whole country into chaos by trying to deport 12 million people as he's promised. What would the economic effect of that be? And I ask because I get business people coming to my office all the time from the hotel sector, from the construction sector, from seafood, from agriculture, saying there aren't enough people to do the work now. What would happen if we deported 12 million people?
Right. Look, it would be a blow to the economy similar to the Great Recession in size, $2 trillion blow to the GDP on an annual basis. You're talking about a massive blow to the budget. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that deficits will be lower by $1 trillion as a result of the immigrant workers that are working in the United States in these industries. And look, many American workers depend on the workers that we're talking about. In construction, you have 2 million Americans who are working in specialized positions and as managers and supervisors of illegal immigrant workers who are doing the tough manual labor jobs at the low end. So there's a complementarity between the U.S. workforce and the immigrant workforce.
Well, most violent criminals are not undocumented immigrants. Most undocumented immigrants are not violent criminals. What would it do to our efforts to actually fight real violent crime and gun-based crime in America, the AR-15s, the illegal trafficking guns, if we diverted federal, state, and local law enforcement just to deporting people who've not committed any crimes at all?
Look, we already don't solve 50% of murders in the United States, 75% of sexual assaults go unsolved. If you look at property crime, it's almost like we're not trying. We need to focus on serious crimes in this country. We have a crime problem. I completely agree with that. But diverting state and local police in particular away from getting justice for victims is a terrible idea for the country. It will not produce safety.
Yeah. And do you think it's a step on behalf of law and order to release en masse violent criminals who attacked the U.S. government to interrupt the joint session of Congress and the peaceful transfer of power in America?
I think people who commit violent crime should have to serve their sentences. and be punished accordingly.
And that was actually the position, I think, taken by our distinguished colleague, Mr. Jordan from Ohio, who repeatedly distinguished between violent and nonviolent offenders. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter in the record a CNN article in which Chairman Jordan was quoted as being hesitant about the sweeping pardons, and saying that they basically should be focused on people who had committed nonviolent rather than violent offenses.
Without objection.
Finally, what should we be doing now to fix the immigration system?
Anyone could design a better legal immigration system than the one that we actually have. We need Congress to sit down and do their job and say, look, if we want people who come, who can support themselves, who can contribute to this country, there's a way to do it. It's not rocket science. You can write a law that says you have to come and be able to support yourself and contribute to the economy. We have bills that have done this in the past. We just need to pick them up and start that work again.
Thank you.
Time
Yield
has
back.
expired. Chairman Jordan.
Mr. Newman, did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
I think the stats show no. I mean, we've got a non-detained...
That whole conversation just took place, sounded like a bunch of nonsense to me.
Yeah, same.
Certainly 77 million Americans don't believe what they just heard from Mr. Raskin and the Democrat witness. Ms. Vaughan, did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
No, the Biden administration dismantled the controls, guardrails, limits, and turned programs into purposes for which they were never
Every
intended.
community on the border knows they did it. Yeah, we just had a 5-minute conversation. Oh, well, things are just wonderful. Joe Biden was the greatest. Mr. Fabbricatore, you've been out on the front lines. You've dealt with this. Did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
No, we have more illegal alien criminals on the street today because of the Biden administration.
Yeah, they're trying to say, don't believe your lying eyes. Of course we know it's gotten worse. Earlier, Mr. Newman, you said, I think you said, the Biden administration invited the crisis. I think you're being nice when you use the word invited. I think they intentionally, deliberately, what's my opening statement, willfully created the crisis. And I want to know, why would they do that? Why would an administration deliberately create the chaos we have seen, upwards of 10 million people coming in the country, these border communities? It's interesting, these border communities, that's been the biggest change in voting Democrat to voting Republican has taken place in those communities because they've felt it firsthand. We were in Yuma, Mr. Biggs brought this up, we were in Yuma, Arizona. The cost of the education system, the healthcare system, the public services in those communities, unbelievable. So why would they intentionally, why would they do this? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Why would an administration say we're going to deliberately create the chaos that 77 million Americans, I think all Americans know, has taken place over the last 4 years?
I can't pretend to know the motive of the administration, but what
I'm asking you to hazard a guess as an expert in this area.
Looking at what they've done and looking at the policies, what's very clear is that there's been an intentional desire to get as many people into the country as possible and keep them here.
Ms. Vaughan, can you take a run at that question? Why would they do it? I think all kinds of Americans ask that question. Why would our government do this to our nation?
Because they don't want any limits on immigration, and because no one could stop them.
Mr. Fabbricatore?
There was a definite open border agenda at the last 4 years, and that is exactly the way that I see it.
You think there's, again, hazard a guess at the motivation. What do you think the motivation is?
You know, it's hard to guess at allowing so many illegal aliens to enter into the United States. It's something that when you actually look at it and you look at the numbers, it's unfathomable to even think that many people were allowed. The gotaways, the 2 million gotaways that were allowed in this country, that we have no idea who they are. To me, I have no idea why they would allow that to happen.
I don't get it either, particularly when you think about what happens to kids on this journey when they come to the country, what happens to women, the terrible things that take. I don't get it. And for them to try to say it was wonderful and it was an improvement, I don't get that either, because nobody believes that. I think earlier the ranking member said the asylum system was overwhelmed during the Biden administration. Why was it overwhelmed? Because they just opened everything up. No wall, no way, remain in Mexico. And when you get here, as you pointed out in your testimony, Mr. Fabbricatore, you won't be detained, you'll be released. Now, what do we have to do to fix it? Mr. Fabbricatore, a guy who's on the front lines, what do we have to do to fix it?
Number one, we need to make sure that we're giving the money to, especially enforcement removal operations, to go out and arrest, detain, and remove illegal aliens. That's the bottom line of what we have to do. We have to say, this is a situation that we have. We need to put money toward this so that we can be effective.
Once you start repatriating, once you start removing individuals who came here illegally, that's going to send a message. That's going to create
Yes.
an incentive I think in the right way. Because right now all the incentives are the wrong way.
Yes.
No wall, no wait, and you won't be detained. Everyone comes. So you got to change those incentives. That will start to do that.
It absolutely will. Letting the men and women know of ICE, of ERO, that they have your backing and they can go out on the street and actually enforce the immigration law. That's all that they're asking to do. That's what President Trump wants to do.
Yep.
He wants to make sure that we go out and the immigration law is actually enforced.
15 seconds. Mr. Newman, I'll give you the last 15.
Yeah, but it's that. You have to fund the resources for ICE to get the job done. You have to show to people in this country illegally that you could be caught and you could be sent home.
Well, this committee is committed to helping the administration have the resources to enforce the law and fix the problem. I yield back to the chairman.
Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, just because someone repeats fiction over and over and over again doesn't make it true. We all want an immigration system that works, a border that is secure, and a country that's safe. But our immigration laws are broken and vastly outdated and underfunded for the world that we live in today. And that's an issue that Congress needs to solve comprehensively and responsibly. But after taking the oath of office this week, the new president signed more than 200 divisive and politically motivated executive actions that don't further that process of reforming and fixing our border or our immigration system. Included among those orders were several that seemed destined to create more chaos in our immigration system and at our southern border, not less. Because these orders aren't solutions, but political posturing. What do? They eliminate pathways that had been successfully lowering border crossings. They reinstate failed programs of the past. They make it harder to prioritize serious national security threats for enforcement. They have blocked the resettlement of Afghan allies who have been thoroughly vetted and have been waiting years for entry into this country. And there's an attempt to overturn the constitutional right to birthright citizenship, which everyone from the ACLU to the Catholic Church has condemned as being both unconstitutional and inhumane for making those children stateless. These actions do not make our country safer, but the new president and his allies are so deep in the fiction that they have created with their own cynical narrative, one that's designed to sow chaos and anger, that they can't acknowledge reality, much less solve problems. So it's not surprising because these are the same people who blocked the bipartisan border security bill that was negotiated last year. So these orders, this is not new behavior. We saw it all before during the first Trump administration when failed and inhumane immigration policies weakened our economy, undermined our moral standing in the world, and inflicted cruelty upon children and families. We can never forget that the Trump administration's practice of family separation, led by his current border czar, was condemned as purposeful government torture under the Geneva Convention and other international human rights standards by organizations including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, Amnesty International, and faith-based leaders across the country and across the political spectrum. And of course, none of these fixed the issues at our border or made us more secure. Now, Mr. Bier, in your statement, you point out that in his first administration, the policies imposed by President Trump and his allies actually obliterated that's your term, the immigration system and shredded enforcement. Will the executive orders that we're seeing now or the proposed policies have a different impact just because it's a few years later?
No, it's going to make the problem worse because right now we have as I said, a majority of the people who are coming to the border right now are applying to enter legally through a regulated, screened, lawful pathway. So getting rid of that is actually going to make the problem significantly worse. We didn't have these lawful pathways when he entered the last time. So getting rid of these, all of these legal channels, getting rid of the refugee program, all of these is designed to increase illegal immigration, it's sending a message around the world that the way to come to the United States is to come illegally if you shut down the legal channels.
And then, of course, that creates chaos and scenes at the border that allow someone to run again and again and again on the idea that they alone can fix it.
Right, and if you look at what happened, you see the Haitians and the Cubans are a perfect example of this. They, for decades, had entered legally, almost 100% crossed the southwest border legally to apply for asylum. The Trump administration came along, they shut down the process to process people at ports of entry, and then they crossed illegally. And we created a problem where there was no problem. The Biden administration came in, they corrected that mistake, and now almost 100% of those groups are entering legally, or at least they were until the Trump administration took over on January 20th.
I just wanted to turn to one of the current paths, and we're hearing a lot about, oh, you have to follow the rules, you have to follow the legal path. One of the executive orders or actions that occurred this week was to eliminate the app that was allowing immigrants to make an appointment to file a legal claim. So now we have people who've been waiting in Mexico for months to get their appointment, and suddenly that was wiped out.
The gentlelady's time has expired. We'll take that as a statement. Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thanks for the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bier, a quick question. Have you visited with or met Alexis Nungaray?
Not to my knowledge.
You haven't sat down and talked with Alexis Nungaray. Alexis Nungaray was my guest to the inauguration festivities. She was my guest to one of the balls since she wasn't able to attend the inauguration since it was inside. Alexis's daughter, Jocelyn, was murdered last July. Her 13-year-old beautiful little girl was murdered by individuals associated with TDA, dangerous gang in Venezuela, who were released by this administration. This administration, well, I should say the previous administration, the Biden administration, the one we're referring to. The Biden administration released these individuals onto the streets of Texas. And now Alexis's daughter is no longer with us. Alexis chose life when she was a 14-year-old little girl. Alexis is only 28 herself now. I was proud to have her with me this weekend. She is a testament to the greatness of this country. Her parents, her family, migrants themselves, they followed the law. They did it the right way because it has been possible for years to do it the right way. Ms. Vaughan, is it not correct that we have upwards of 3 million people that are put into the United States every year through visas and other programs, student visas, access to becoming an LPR, et cetera?
Well, there are more than 10 million people who come in on non-immigrant visas, and even more than that come in under the visa waiver program. And yeah, it's a huge entry.
There is an enormous opportunity to come here legally right now, correct? Through
yes.
student visas and our normal programs of immigration.
More than a million immigrant visas, probably close to 1 million people who get temporary visas for various purposes as well. We have one of the most generous immigration systems in the country.
1 million green cards, 1 million guest worker visas, 1 million student visas. Does that sound correct to you?
Well, I count the student visas under the million.
So my point being, we are the most generous country in the world by an order of magnitude. And yet this administration has been violently disregarding our laws to dump people into the United States through the abuse of the parole system and putting people on our streets that have led directly to the murder of American citizens. And my colleagues on the other side of the dais here wonder why what happened in November happened. H.R. 2, Mr. Newman, do you agree that H.R. 2 has significant reforms in it that we should adopt this Congress, the H.R. 2 that was passed in the previous Congress in the spring of 2023?
Absolutely.
That bill set out to reform asylum laws, set out to reform parole laws, set out to end the abuse of catch and release through the Flores settlement, and then TVPRA with unaccompanied alien children? Did we fix a lot of those broken problems in H.R. 2?
Yes.
Would that bill have demonstrably changed the ability for a Biden administration to abuse our laws to allow them to be open and endanger the American people?
Yes.
Do you believe that this Congress should take up H.R. 2 in its current form, or in the form that was passed in the last Congress, give or take that bill up and pass it in this Congress?
Yes.
Do you believe that the so-called bipartisan legislation that was tried to move in the last Congress in the Senate, but never passed the Senate, never passed out and moved in any serious fashion, do you believe that bill should be brought up in this Congress?
No, not at all.
Do you agree with me that that bill had enormous flaws in it?
Yes.
That it would have codified a lot of the releases in the broken systems under the Biden administration? Mm-hmm. That would have failed to reform asylum?
Yes.
That would have failed to reform parole?
Yes.
That it would have given more money to NGOs to violate our laws and ignore our borders?
Yes.
In other words, that bill is a joke, a laughingstock. You agree?
Absolutely.
With respect to TDA, Mr. Fabbricatore, a congressman from the jurisdiction that I believe you ran in Aurora, Colorado, tried to dismiss what was happening in apartment complexes. True or false? I went out and visited with you. True or false? TDA is active in the apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and other places around the country.
It is absolutely true, sir. Absolutely 100% true.
And you witnessed the danger with your own eyes.
I witnessed that danger. I've been to those apartment complexes, and recently more people were arrested in those apartment complexes for kidnapping and extorting other people in those apartment complexes.
And you would agree with me that it is a scourge across our country, including in Texas, in my own district, in San Antonio?
Absolutely, sir. It is happening.
Well, we don't have any legal scholars. I'll come back to birthright citizenship in the future, but just suffice it to say, there is significant and ample evidence with what we understand about birthright citizenship that subject to the jurisdiction thereof does not mean that you have a right to citizenship simply for being on our soil and being born on our soil. We'll talk about that in another hearing. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. Speaking of felons who've been released, I seek unanimous consent to introduce the arrest warrant for Daniel Charles Bell, a man who was convicted of throwing explosive devices at law enforcement during the January 6 riots. He's just been arrested on federal gun charges by the Trump-led Washington
The gentlelady
field
is
office.
recognized for a unanimous consent request. The request has been made and without objection granted.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. The fact is that enforcement alone will not fix our immigration system. We need a comprehensive approach that balances effective enforcement with the needs of our country. We must strengthen and expand lawful immigration pathways. This is a common-sense solution that will ease pressure on our border and ensure that individuals seeking a better life and to improve the United States and our economy have a clear and orderly path to enter our country legally. Creating and enhancing a legal pathway is critical towards enhancing national security and protecting our economy. The reality is that cutting lawful pathways only exacerbates the crisis at the border. For instance, the decision to end the CPB-1 app, which was essential to make sure that people could come when they knew they had an appointment, and we actually saw people at the border using that app when we did our Codell to the southern border. Getting rid of it threatens to upend progress, threatens chaos, and it is not a solution for unlawful migration. Additionally, we must consider the humanitarian and economic consequences of mass deportations. Deporting every undocumented immigrant in the country would destroy families, devastate industries, and make our economy less secure. I represent North Carolina. Without immigrant labor, we would have no agriculture industry. We would not have a food service industry. Many of our tech industry executives beg for more lawful pathways to immigration. Our hospitality industry, our construction industry, I hear from them every single day. Furthermore, the President's efforts to eliminate birthright citizenship are deeply disturbing. Not only does this fly in the face of the Constitution, but it creates legal uncertainty for millions of children born in the United States. And that chaos will overwhelm our legal system, sow confusion, and create an underclass of stateless individuals, all in violation of the Constitution. As we discuss the future of immigration enforcement, I urge my colleagues to consider the broader implications of these policies and work together to enact solutions that reflect our values and our needs as a nation. We can secure our border and have enough people in this country to perform essential services. Dr. Bier, or Mr. Bier, I'm sorry, I was elevating you. Since Congress created the Department of Homeland Security in 2003, we've spent approximately $409 billion on immigration enforcement and tens of billions more on border barriers and other immigration enforcement-related infrastructure projects. Despite this massive infusion of money, the system is still broken. Can you explain why focusing on enforcement alone will not fix our broken immigration system?
As long as there's demand for labor in the United States, people are going to try to come in order to fill that demand. We saw it under the Trump administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration. You can go all the way back. As long as there's no legal way for them to fill jobs, they're going to come illegally. And whether you could say greater or lesser extent, they're going to come, and we're going to continue to deal with this problem. And the most critical area is that right now, for lesser skilled jobs, there is no visa, no work visa at all for year-round jobs not requiring a college degree. So where are all the people who are crossing the border going? They're going into those jobs. So we absolutely need to reform our legal immigration system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your work that you've done on this issue. Thank you for your constant persistence in bringing it up over and over again. You have made a difference on the issue, a significant one, and a difference in the United States of America, and I mean it. I'm proud of the work you've done. Mr. Bier, I can't say the same for you. Man, I don't even have the words, and I would need an hour and a half with you, one-on-one, alone, to go through it. And please forgive
I'd be happy to, anytime.
We'll take you up on that. Let me tell you, I mean, the things that you said to me, and I mean, I'm not being disrespectful because I always try to be respectful to everybody, are bizarre. I believe like I'm in bizarro world. I don't even know where these statements come from.
Well, I got all the statistics in my
I
statement.
didn't ask you a question, sir. Mr. Roy, I want to associate some of the words that he said. I wish you could sit in front of the families, and it isn't just Lake and Riley. I can give you name after name after name of men and women and children who were beaten, who were raped, who were abused, who were disfigured, who were harmed. And we keep overlooking that because we say, well, there wasn't that many of them. We don't care about the 400 people that got into this country, the best that we can tell, that are on the terror watch list. Well, it's just not that many of them. Let me tell you, to the mother or the father or the son or the daughter that loses somebody, one is enough. And to have this intellectual argument as we sit here in our comfortable chairs in our warm room where Lake and Riley, for example, fought for 20 minutes not to be raped and then finally was beaten so badly and her skull crushed in that she lost her life while her mother was calling her, wondering where she was. That's what matters to me. So, today's theme is a simple one. Actions have consequences.
President Biden's dozen of executive orders, they crippled our border security and opened up the floodgates of the southern border. That is a fact. Mr. Bier, I don't care what you say, it's a fact. We see it, we feel it. That's why Americans know it. That's why the election that occurred. Congressional Democrats refused to pass H.R. 2, which was a good piece of legislation, and the floodgates opened more. State and local Democratic leaders opened their cities and spent billions upon billions of dollars to care for illegal immigrants. Legal immigration is good. When my colleagues on the other side speak about immigration, let's make sure we all understand there is a big difference between legal and illegal immigration. Under President Biden, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered, and the number changes, it fluctuates, but it's about 10 million inadmissible aliens from January 2021 to December 2024. That's 3 times the number encountered during the Trump administration. Let's talk about the real numbers and the real facts. The Biden administration deliberately dismantled the effective protocols and tools that we had. It instituted catch and release. That had an effect. It ended the construction of the wall. That had an even worse effect. They ended Title 42. That had another bad effect. And they ended the Remain in Mexico policy, which hurt us as well. Over and over and over again. Everything to open up the borders. No nation prevails with open borders. And the negligence has introduced us to serious international and national danger. Nearly 400 individuals, as I said, on the terror watch list. They're not hypotheticals. They're real people. They're real men and women that have been hurt. And, you know, the gentleman, good man on the other side, the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, said most illegals are not violent. Most illegals are not violent. I agree with that. Most are not violent. They're still breaking the law. But damn it, enough of them are that it's scary. Tell all those families that most of them are not violent. They don't care about most of them. Come on, let's get in the real world. And it's not compassionate what my friends on the other side of the aisle are doing. It hurts us. And it hurts illegals, it hurts children, it hurts American families, it hurts legal immigrants as well. So I have a question for Mr. Fabbricatore. I hope I pronounced your name.
Yes, sir.
I was the first non-Italian to marry in my wife's family, and they're probably listening to this, and I'll get in trouble if I screwed it up. I think we shouldn't fund sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. We're sending federal money over there. They're purposely breaking the law. What do you think, and what's the specific impact cutting off this federal funding would have?
We should not fund them. Sanctuary cities do not protect American citizens. They only protect criminal illegal aliens.
Thank you. The gentleman's time is... Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all the witnesses today. To no one's surprise, President Trump continues again using nativist rhetoric to demonize all immigrants, to scare the public. Now the House and the Senate have passed the bill to turn those words into devastating action. So my first question for Mr. Bier is this. Mr. Bier, on January 7th, you tweeted that the Laken-Riley Act pretends to be about stopping illegal immigrants who commit crimes. In fact, it's a Trojan horse designed to destroy legal migration. End of quote. As you know, the Laken-Riley Act permits the attorneys general to sue DHS for perceived failures in immigration enforcement. So I'd appreciate you spelling it out here. What are the dangers of that section in the Laken-Riley Act, and specifically, how can it be weaponized by state officials to dismantle legal immigration?
Look, people who commit crimes are already priorities for removal. They were priorities for removal under the Biden administration. They're priorities for removal right now. So there's no difference there. What is different about this act is the empowerment of states' attorneys generals to go to courts and force the Secretary of State to stop issuing visas to countries that delay deportations to their countries. So India, China, the largest origin countries, Cuba, Venezuela. These are all countries that are on the list. We would have to stop admitting Afghan allies from Afghanistan, of course. So it basically takes the authority away from the Secretary of State. Future Rubio, in this case, would not have the ability to make that determination. It would be turned over to the courts and result in a huge slash in legal immigration and really no change in interior enforcement.
So it really provides unprecedented powers to attorneys general in the states over a federal matter. Let's switch gears to the Alien Enemies Act. This is an executive order recently invoked by the president. It was enacted in 1789, was designed to address threats during times of declared war, but it's been criticized since it was implemented in the 18th century, and it continues to be invoked to strip the rights from entire groups based on their national origin. For example, to justify the detainment of Japanese Americans, Italian, German Americans during World War II, or more recently, Trump's Muslim ban. President Trump signed an executive order to use the Alien Enemies Act to do mass deportations without due process, raising significant constitutional questions. How does this align with the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees due process to all individuals within the United States, Mr. Bier?
Yeah, so if he invokes the Alien Enemies Act, it would give him power to use the military to detain, arrest, and remove people without proving that they're in the country illegally or are removable from the United States. That's an incredibly dangerous power that threatens the rights of all Americans. It also could apply even to legal permanent residents and other non-citizens who could be removed. Again, we're not subject to an invasion by a foreign government as required by the act, so I don't know where he's going to be able to justify the use of this authority that was designed for cases of war.
Thank you. And in 1 minute, I want you to comment on another debate going on regarding the 14th Amendment. Some argue that the framers did not consider illegal immigrants when drafting the citizenship clause. Could you elaborate on your perspective regarding the 14th Amendment?
Well, if they didn't think about illegal immigrants, then they couldn't possibly have written an exception to them, to the general rule that anyone born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. Obviously, if they weren't thinking about illegal immigrants, they couldn't have written that exception into the law. And obviously, it doesn't apply in this case, because if illegal immigrants are not subject to the laws of the United States, then they're not illegal immigrants. So it's a circular argument that makes no sense, and I assume will be laughed out of the courts.
And thus, the absurdity of attempting to deny birthright to those born in this country.
Oh, completely absurd. And it's not even just illegal immigrants we're talking about, their children, also the children of legal residents who've been invited here by our government under visa categories, guest workers, international students. Even the former Vice President, Kamala Harris, would be potentially affected by this illegal and unconstitutional order.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think we'll talk more about the 14th Amendment. Obviously, it passed right after slavery was eradicated in the United States. So all those children born to the slaves were allowed to be citizens. If you look at the congressional record when they debated that, it's pretty clear. But we will talk about that today. President Trump said yesterday in his inaugural speech to restore common sense to America, just common sense. And so I'm reminded of lies, and I'm going to give you the Southern Baptist version, lies, dang lies, and statistics. Now, Mr. Bier has given us a lot of statistics today, but the reality is that 76 million people elected Donald Trump to fix the chaos that is the U.S. southern border right now. And what I've seen in my communities, and you've heard testimony in here, I had a 14-year-old girl in one of my districts drug into a bathroom and raped by a Nicaraguan who had a prior criminal record, Mr. Fabbricatore, but he came here 31 years old and claimed to be a minor. And we did no background checks. We turned that man loose into the community, and he raped a girl in a bathroom in a restaurant in Wetumpka, Alabama. That's the kind of chaos that we've seen on the border. Sheriff Daniels testified. He came here and testified under oath that in 40 years of working in a border town, he had never seen the border any better than it was in 2018, and never any worse than it was when he was here just a few months ago. Mr. Fabbricatore, what do you think changed? What changed? Was it anything we did here in Congress?
What changed was the Biden administration letting in millions of people unvetted. The vetting at the border was abysmal at best. It was only checking for histories within the United States. So if you had someone that had committed crimes in another country—
You hadn't been here, you don't have a history in this country.
We did not know, many people who came in, we did not know what their criminal histories were. And we allowed them to come.
Is that how a 31-year-old man claims to be a minor and comes in as an unaccompanied minor to this country? Because we weren't vetting anybody.
The vetting was horrible, and that instance happens a lot, where we have them claiming to be juveniles, criminal illegal aliens claiming to be juveniles because they know it will be easier to enter the United States, and they probably won't get put into detention. And the Biden administration allowed that to happen.
You know, and Ms. Vaughan, certainly we've seen this across the country. The fentanyl deaths and the sort of things that are happening in our communities. Over 100,000 kids we lost to fentanyl deaths, pouring across the U.S. southern border. And in Yuma, Arizona, when we had the hearing there, folks, we literally had people coming across in labor. They were taking them to a hospital, and those ladies were delivering children in the ERs to the point that even the U.S. citizens could not get a bed when they were in labor and delivery. And one of the most astonishing things that I saw was that the hospital, by federal law, was required to provide them car seats. And so they were running out of car seats for ladies who were having children in our hospitals while the American citizens could not get a labor and delivery bed. That was going on under the prior administration. Now, so I let out with President Trump said something about common sense. I'm gonna give you an opportunity, each of you guys, to tell me the one thing that you think Congress needs to do that makes common sense. How do we fix this crisis that we have? How do we fulfill the promise of securing the U.S. southern border and making America safe again? Mr. Fabbricatore, Fab, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, sir. Make sure ICE is funded. Make sure enforcement removal operations has the officers necessary. Increase detention beds. We need a massive increase in detention beds from what we have now, which is around 40,000, to probably in excess of 70,000. We need to make sure that we can fund this so that we can take care of this problem today.
The chairman mentioned that. We're going to, as this committee and as Congress, we are going to make sure that we fund the president's priorities to round people up and get them out of here. Ms. Vaughan.
Another thing that would help a lot would be to eliminate all of the programs that allow people who've managed to get into the country to have their status laundered essentially into a program, a visa program or a benefit that gives them a work permit. And
How do you, Ms. Vaughan, how do you launder a status? That's interesting.
Well, you apply for a program like a U visa program, Special Immigrant Juvenile, or TPS sometimes can be granted. Even though you entered illegally, you're allowed to stay and you get a work permit, and the systems are so bogged down, you get this benefit even before your application has been evaluated or you've had a background check, and many of these have a path to citizenship.
Talking about bogging the system down, folks, in Yuma, Arizona, we had the testimony. They were getting a cell phone, $800 a month, and we were turning them loose. And then the phones are so we could call them to come to their court case, but they would take our phones and not our calls. It was quite astonishing. Mr. Newman, one quick common sense fix.
Pass H.R. 2. Stop the loopholes.
Very good, very good.
To do this.
You know, we passed that in the House, but the Democratic-controlled Senate would not pass it. Do you know that? You aware of that? We'll bring it back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Time has expired. Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I am going to try to get through a lot quickly. As one of the few people sitting on the dais who actually practice criminal law in the state of Texas, as well as licensed in Arkansas and practice there, as well as federal courts, one of the things that you said earlier, Mr. Bier, really stuck with me, is that there are already laws on the books as it relates to those violent criminals. And I know this because even though I hail from the great city of Dallas, I can tell you that when someone would come in and they were being held in custody for, say, a crime, they also had an ICE hold, okay? And that was for those that had maybe been deported before and had re-entered illegally and things like that. And so no matter what type of city you're in, I do want to be clear, federal law already no matter if it's under the Biden administration or if it's under a Republican administration, we all agree that we want to be safe. And I think that's the first premise that we're losing, because there isn't something that is tatted on my head that says that I'm a Democrat and therefore you illegal bad person, don't come for me, go for the ones that have the R's on their forehead. Now let me be clear about this as well, because we've talked about crime and we've talked about fentanyl specifically, and this is also something that I have dealt with, unlike some of my other colleagues. And listen, I'm gonna be honest, because I actually wanna fix problems. And I actually have a really good senator in Texas, and I'm sure y'all can guess which one is the good one. But let me tell you, if we care about fentanyl, I have multiple bills for that. I started on the state level before everybody started talking about it, and I have federal bills that my senior senator has signed on to. So I welcome my colleagues, because I actually want to make sure that my communities are safe. But as we start to talk about crime and statistics, Mr. Bier, I want to play a little game with you. It's called rhetoric versus reality. And so I want to ask you, my first question, is this rhetoric or reality? Immigrants commit more crimes than US citizens.
On a per capita basis?
Rhetoric or reality?
Oh, it is rhetoric.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, which states that undocumented immigrant offending rate lower than US-born citizen rate, and this is from nij.ojp.gov.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. The next one, immigrants are just living off the federal government and contribute nothing.
That would be rhetoric.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I would ask unanimous consent to enter study that says undocumented immigrants pay almost $100 billion in taxes. This is from the Alabama Reflector.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. My final rhetoric or reality question is immigrants only enter at the southern border.
Rhetoric.
Okay, right, because they enter all kinds of ways. I just wanted to make sure that I put that out there. In fact, I have a few more questions because I still got a little bit of time, which I usually run out of time. We have talked again about crime, and there's been this overemphasis on it. And honestly, I can tell you that I don't want anyone to be killed, whether it's here or anywhere else. There is nothing about me as the child of a preacher that makes me say that I want people to die, okay? So I feel as if my colleagues from across the aisle have decided that they are going to make immigrants the boogeyman. It's insanity to me, but they also are showing compassion for victims, which they should, but they have no compassion for people that are contributing to making us great in this country. So interestingly enough, I'm curious to know, Mr. Bier, if you know if immigrants contributed to these particular crimes. There was a mass shooting in Buffalo, New York that killed a number of African Americans as they were trying to shop for groceries. Was the defendant an immigrant in that case? Do you know?
No, he was a US-born citizen.
Thank you so much. Charleston, South Carolina, there were black churchgoers trying to praise the Lord. They were killed. Was that an immigrant that perpetrated that or not?
No, that was a US-born citizen.
Thank you so much. Now, coming home to Texas, there was an El Paso shooting. Do you know if that was an immigrant or not?
No, they were targeting immigrants in that case.
In fact, each of these cases, it was white supremacists. And so the last unanimous consent that I'd ask for is this article that states that white supremacists behind over 80% of extremism-related U.S. murders in 2022.
Without objection.
Thank you so much.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Grofman.
Thank you. Eventually, some sort of immigration bill is going to be passed this Congress. We're trying to look for some common ground. Mr. Bier, we've talked about this before. In the past, I've introduced something called the Safeguarding Benefits for Americans Act, which prevents non-citizens from receiving what we'll normally refer to as welfare benefits. I just want to confirm that you think that'd be a good idea, probably improving the quality of immigrants we have coming here.
Absolutely. Immigrants should be self-sufficient when they come to the United States.
Very good. Well, there's maybe something we can receive bipartisan support for when we move an immigration bill. Next thing I'd like to point out, and Mr. Moore's always handled this to a degree, I want to point out that in the 14th Amendment, it does not say all persons born in the United States become citizens of the United States. It's all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That amendment was passed coming out of the Civil War. There's a reason it was passed coming out of the Civil War. Congress was afraid that the Democrats would try to undermine the results of that war by forbidding former slaves from voting. And clearly that's what the amendment was supposed to deal with. It did not include anybody who just happened to show up here and have a baby and moved on. Any congressman at that time, as can be seen from the debate on the floor at that time, no congressman felt that resulted in what we are now referring to as birthright citizenship. It was supposed to be limited to slaves. You did not have, you were not subject to the jurisdiction, or you were only subject to the jurisdiction thereof if you were a former slave. A person who came here from France and was just passing through, their child would not become a citizen. That should be obvious. Now, we want to get on to a few more questions. I'm going to ask these of Ms. Vaughan. When a child arrives at the board, okay, one of the heartbreaking stories you sometimes hear in this country is parents get divorced, one parent grabs the child and flees to somewhere like Pakistan or somewhere. The other parent is here in the United States and they can't get that child back. In other words, it results in a broken family, which is just horrible. And I do think we have to do all we can to keep families together. In this country, under the Biden administration before that, if a child shows up with one parent and they come in this country, is any effort made to see whether the local courts, say the child comes here from Guatemala, Cuba, wherever, that the local court has said that they want the parents separate, or do we just assume that the other parent would be okay with this and not seeing his child again?
Well, if you're referring to cases in which the child is seeking an order of protection from, say, a state family court, is that the scenario?
Well, let's say there's a divorce.
Or at the border itself? At the border, there, families who arrive, or a person who, or an adult who arrives with a child is not detained.
Right. Do you think there should be? Do you think that we should do something to make sure that we don't have a situation like I described, where one parent takes a child to Pakistan and they're gone? I mean, again, if a parent shows up at the southern, one parent with a child, we don't know where the other parent is. We don't know whether that parent is, the parent who shows up is fleeing the other parent, trying to raise that child without a parent. Is that of concern to you?
Well, it is, because our state family courts are not in a position to evaluate those claims made if the alien child, for example, is seeking a special immigrant juvenile visa, seeking to stay here permanently. There's just no way, they're not held to the same standards of evidence that, say, an American kid would have to receive an order of protection. So this leads to abuse.
You think it'd be a good idea when we pass our immigration law if we said that if a child is here with one parent, we have to make sure legally somehow that the other parent is okay with that, or it's in accordance with the local courts, and like I said, Guatemala, Cuba, wherever, that the local courts have said it's okay that we're permanently breaking up the family, which I think should happen very rarely.
Yeah, that's a tough thing for the American legal system to deal with, something that happened, a separation that occurred in the home country.
Well, we wouldn't have to deal with the system if we insisted having both parents here in the first place.
Right.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bier, let me ask you, somebody asked you a question about Lake and Raleigh case, and you said that people who were criminals or felons were already prioritized. Isn't that if they're convicted?
That's right. You need a criminal conviction to be subject to mandatory detention. You don't need a criminal conviction if you are in the country illegally already, and the administration can go out and arrest that person even without a criminal conviction.
But Lake and Riley, I believe, was the bill we had that expanded that to people who were charged with, not convicted of misdemeanor.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't even need an arrest to be subject to mandatory detention. So there's a difference. There is discretion for ICE to go get someone who is fleeing or evading charges. But if someone has just been arrested and then they're never charged because they didn't commit the crime, it would be wrong to subject someone to mandatory imprisonment in a case where they were cleared.
So you think there should be some priorities in who we try to deport?
Absolutely. We need to focus on people who have violated the rights of Americans, who have committed crimes with victims. Those are the people that we need to seek justice for, not just if they're immigrants, but in general, that's what law enforcement should be focusing on.
Even on pardons, if you had people that were tried to overthrow the government on January 6th, that you should go after people that were maybe beat cops up and led the operation, as distinguished from people that were just showed up and kind of hung out.
I absolutely believe that we should focus on violent offenders and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
Is it Fabbricatore?
Affirmative, sir. Yes, thank you.
Do you agree with what Mr. Bier said, that we should have priorities on who we go after?
No, sir, I do not. I believe we should focus.
DACA kids who've been in this country for maybe 20 or 25 years and been good citizens, maybe, and maybe been in the military or the National Guard or something, that they should be rounded up and deported as well?
Well, the focus should be on criminals initially, but if you're violating the immigration law, you've violated the immigration law. You've violated laws of the United States, and at some point in time, that needs to come to a reckoning.
We don't have enough monies to put into this to deport everybody that's in that category, right?
I would ask that you would fund that, sir, as Congress.
Well, if we fund it, we'd probably have to cut out lots of basic programs we've got now. It's a tremendous amount of money, billions and billions of dollars.
I don't put a cost on United States citizens' lives, sir.
Okay. Maybe we can get Elon to pay for it. The election's over, and we need to find common ground. The bill that the Senate was proposing, how many Republicans were for that bill or voted for it?
I don't remember. Could be a couple.
Could be 15 or 16, couldn't it?
I don't have the answer to that.
Well, I think it was closer to 15 or 16. I don't recall exactly. But there were quite a few. What did that bill do that was good, and what we should take up now, and what was in the bill, if anything, that you think was bad?
Well, I certainly think that one of the most important reforms in that legislation was that if someone is released from U.S. custody, they're able to seek a work authorization and support themselves. What we saw in New York, and it's pointed to repeatedly about these people who are living in hotel rooms and a burden on the community, it's because they're unable to work to support themselves because they're told you're not supposed to work, you have to wait 6 months to get your work permit through the asylum process. So if the government is not going to remove someone, they're going to release them unless they've committed some serious crime or there's some other aggravating circumstance, they should be supporting themselves and contributing to the community. So that's one important thing that it did. It made some important reforms to the legal immigration process as well, increasing green card caps for the first time since 1990. That's how old our legal immigration system is. The overall framework of the legal immigration system needs to be reformed. This was a modest step in the right direction.
What we need is legislation that is thought out, not just common sense, but logical, thought out, and planned. Not where somebody might just say, what are we going to do with all these January 6 people? Well, it's going to take some time. We have to take some processes, so just F it. Just do them all. That's a man-child. We don't need a man-child in charge of our government or making policy, because that makes for mistakes. That makes for the guy who came up with the Silk Road and be the biggest drug dealer in the world to get a pardon. Needs to stop. And our immigration laws ought to be done in a logical manner and with priorities. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing. I think it's really appropriate as we begin this Congress that we start with the issue that was settled in November and why the American people chose overwhelmingly Donald Trump to be our 47th president. I'm a little perplexed, though, Mr. Bier, about a statement that you made that Joe Biden made the border and the immigration system better. Nobody believes that. People in their communities, and I'm not going to ask you a question about this, but nobody believes that. And in fact, behind me, the numbers don't lie, sir. Look at the hike under the Biden administration of illegal migrants coming into this country. And he fixed the problem or made it better? I don't think so. And I would also remind you, and for people watching back home, that it didn't get better. In fact, in September of last year, Chairman Green of the Homeland Security Committee released a press release talking about a letter that they received from ICE that nearly 650,000 criminal illegal aliens were currently in ICE's non-detained docket, roaming free in the community. That means that they were picked up, processed, had their criminal backgrounds obtained by the U.S. government, and released into the interior of this country. 15,000 homicides, 20,000 sexual assaults over 100,000, burglary, larceny, and robbery, 60,000, traffic offenses, 126,000, kidnappings, 3,500. The list goes on. And so nobody actually believes, sir, that the immigration system got better under Joe Biden. So real quick, Mr. Fabbricatore, Mr. Newman, and Ms. Vaughan, I'm going to go down the line here and ask a couple questions. When Joe Biden terminated the Remain in Mexico policy, did that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration, sir?
No, it did not, sir.
Ms. Vaughan?
No.
Mr. Newman?
No.
When Joe Biden halted construction of the border wall on day one of his administration, did that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration in this country, Mr. Fabbricatore?
It did not decrease illegal immigration.
No, sir.
Mr. Newman?
No.
When he terminated the asylum cooperative agreements with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, did that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
No.
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 When he bastardized parole authority and changed the law himself, did that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
No, sir.
No, got worse.
I think the answers are pretty clear. In fact, when we went to Yuma, Arizona, and met with the community and saw firsthand, of course, the Democrats didn't even show up to work. They wouldn't go down there with us. It was an actual Judiciary Committee hearing, field hearing in Yuma, and they didn't come. But we would hear from the people there. The stress on the healthcare system, the stress at the border, the stress on the families. You couldn't even get a hospital room if you needed to have a child or if you broke your leg. Those are the people who were impacted. And of course, we see this all in our community. So let's fast forward to today. President Trump, with his executive orders, reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy. Will that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration, sir?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Vaughan?
I believe so, yes.
Absolutely.
Will completing construction of the border wall and funding our immigration services down there, will that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
It will help decrease illegal immigration.
Ms. Vaughan?
As long as there are no policies to undermine the deterrence.
That's the key point. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's a key tool to help.
Will designating cartels and gangs as foreign terrorist organizations lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
Yes.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so.
Will terminating categorical parole programs lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
Absolutely will.
Definitely.
Yes.
Mr. Newman? Will terminating the use of the CBP One app, which I think was described by somebody on this committee as the Disney Fast Pass for illegal immigration, will that lead to a decrease in illegal immigration?
It will. It was full of fraud.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty clear. And I think the next steps, obviously, they're part one of this are the executive orders. Part two, what Congress can do. So, Mr. Fabbricatore, just for perspective, you served at ICE during the Trump administration and part of the Biden-Harris administration. How would you describe the differences between the two administrations, very briefly, in enforcement of illegal enforcement under both administrations?
It was night and day. President Trump wanted to enforce what was exactly in the INA, while President Biden, the minute that he came into office, it was a change into we are not enforcing these laws, we're opening this border. He wanted a 100-day moratorium on deportations the first day when he was in office.
Ms. Vaughan, final question for you. What steps can we take to make sure that future administrations, like the Biden administration, don't undermine the actual law or twist policies that we can have a permanent fix to this problem.
In addition to funding immigration enforcement, to rewrite the rules on some of these programs and discretionary authorities to give out work permits and categorical parole or attempt categorical parole. And also, I think to get better control and restore integrity to our legal immigration system. Because that, you know, when people know that there are loopholes that exist, they come to try to take advantage of them.
Thank you.
Close the loopholes, well
Gentleman's time
said,
has
and I yield
expired.
back. Thank you.
Mr. Nadler.
Mr. Chairman, the flurry of executive orders signed by President Trump on Monday promised little more than the chaos and cruelty we became accustomed to in his first term. His radical anti-immigration agenda will separate families, decimate our economy, and strike fear in our communities. With the stroke of a pen, he has revived the harsh and inhumane policies of his previous administration, such as the Remain in Mexico program, eliminated enforcement priorities, sharply reduced the availability of humanitarian parole, begun dismantling the refugee program, and launched a breathtaking assault on the Constitution by attempting to end birthright citizenship. But the Trump administration's policy of mass deportation and destroying legal pathways, wrapped as always in a blanket of hateful rhetoric, will not fix our broken immigration system. It will only make it harder to reach the bipartisan comprehensive solutions that are so desperately needed. Mr. Bier, thank you for being here today. Republicans are using this hearing to lay the foundation for their own anti-immigration agenda. So I want to start with some important facts about the state of the border today. One, when President Biden left office earlier this week, were unauthorized crossings higher or lower than they were when President Trump left office?
They were much lower, significantly lower, about 33% lower than when President Trump left office.
Thank you. What about evasions of Border Patrol officers? Were they higher at the end of President Trump's first term or President Biden's?
They were 42% lower at the end of Biden's term than at the end of Trump's, and Trump's increased evasions over the course of his 4 years.
And isn't it true that unlawful encounters at the border were trending upwards long before President Biden took office?
Every month after April 2020, it increased. He keeps pointing to April 2020 when the pandemic started and unemployment spiked. But every month after that, we saw increases in illegal immigration and border crossings and evasions of Border Patrol.
Thank you. I want to turn now to the executive order that purports to end birthright citizenship. This executive order prevents the children of immigrants, both those whose parents have a lawful immigration status like a work visa and those whose parents are undocumented, who are born in the United States, from being able to obtain documents to demonstrate that they are citizens of the United States. Can you please talk about how this would work in practice and the sort of chaos that will ensue if this order is actually allowed to go forward?
Oh, absolutely. This is going to apply to every single American child born in the United States. You will have to prove the status and citizenship.
Every child, not just those of undocumented immigrants.
Exactly. My family is going to go through this in a few months. We're going to have to prove the citizenship of the parents of the child. Of course, we can do that. But if you don't have a passport, according to this order, you don't have proof of citizenship. Your birth certificate isn't enough. And so you will have to go through the rabbit hole. I'll have to prove my parents' citizenship and paperwork. I mean, this is the insanity of this order from an administrative perspective. It's going to burden every single American. It's going to call into question all of our citizenship. And looking forward, it's going to create a lot of people who are in stateless situations where they don't have citizenship of any country and can be subject to removal even though they were born here, they grew up here. They are Americans. This is an attack on Americans and our rights.
Let's take a specific example of the impact this executive order could have. The extensive green card backlogs for high-skilled workers mean that H-1B visa holders must wait decades and even centuries before a green card is available to them. Right now, if both parents have H-1B status, A child who is born abroad but who has lived in the United States for nearly their entire lives must leave the country when they turn 21 unless they have their own immigration status. That's bad enough, but under this executive order, even children born in the U.S. to such parents might have to self-deport because they would be denied citizenship at birth. Mr. Bier, does it make sense to send children who are born in the United States to countries that they don't know, may never have been to, and where they have no support network?
No, it absolutely does not. It makes the country weaker. It discourages legal immigration. It discourages high-skilled immigration. Look, when I talk to a lot of high-skilled immigrants in this country, they talk about their family. They talk about the hope they have for their children to be Americans, to grow up in this country and to contribute to this country. And we should want them here. We should want to encourage them to stay. And one of the greatest things the United States has ever done is had birthright citizenship, because it encourages assimilation. Everyone who's born here knows I'm an American, I can participate in our democracy and contribute to this country.
And contrary to the President's assertion that only one country has birthright citizenship, 33 do. I yield back.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Biden attempted to reimagine immigration in America. Biden wanted you to think that it was normal to live in an America with open borders, to live in an America with sanctuary cities, to fly 30,000 people per month from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela into America on commercial flights, to turn temporary protected status into permanent protected status. That is not normal. It is not constitutional. And now, thank God, it's over. Do you want to know what is normal? President Trump's policies are normal, and he's back, and he is here to help. Within hours of Trump's taking office, President Trump deleted the CBP One app, reformed the parole program, and placed a real border czar, Tom Homan, in charge. And he is a serious man. Trump also signed a flurry of executive orders restoring normal border security and immigration standards to this great nation. Again, thank God he's back. When Trump got elected, we knew that the liberal media we knew exactly what they would do, because they do the same thing during the previous Trump administration. We knew that they would attempt to pull our heartstrings to shame us into changing our standard immigration laws. In fact, on the day that President Trump got inaugurated, the liberal media posted a story of a woman crying when her CBP One app appointment was canceled. That tactic is not going to work this time, because we have seen firsthand for the last 4 years the devastating effects that Biden's border policies have had on all Americans. And while I empathize with everyone who wants to come to America, because again, we know this is the greatest place in the world, this compassion is misplaced, as it usually is with the left. The woman's tears that I care the most about are the mothers of Lincoln Riley, Jocelyn Nungary, and Rachel Morin. Lincoln Riley was killed by an illegal alien while out on a jog. It should be known that her killer committed a crime in another American city, but he was released because that city, you guessed it, was a sanctuary city. Jocelyn, while on her way to a convenience store, was killed by 2 illegal aliens who entered through the southern border just a few months earlier. At the time, these illegal aliens were still wearing their U.S.-issued ankle tracking monitors when they killed her. Miss Morin, a young mother of 5 children, was hiking on the Maryland Trail when an illegal alien attacked and killed her. And I could sadly name many more circumstances just like this. I don't know about other countries, but in America, our daughters, and I have 2 of them, should be able to go for a jog and a run or to a convenience store without the fear of an illegal alien killing them. That goes for all of our children in this nation. I serve this country to protect my children and our sons and daughters. Mr. Fabbricatore, thank you so much for being here. As always, you're one of my favorites. One of the executive orders that President Trump has enacted so far, of them, which one do you think is going to be the most helpful and why?
Well, I number one, I think all the executive orders that he's putting through are going to be, they're needed. There's a reason why he did it. But securing our border, number one, making sure that the CBP app is no longer being used so that there's fraud coming into this country. I think overall, everything that President Trump is trying to do for the border is for the right reason. The number one priority should be protecting American citizens, and I think that was the goal of President Trump.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughan, given these last few executive orders as well, I'd actually like your take on that. And do you think it is going to improve our border and our immigration status, or is it going to hurt our immigration status? Just out of curiosity.
The set of executive orders are definitely going to improve our immigration status, especially the one that rescinded the Biden orders. I especially look forward to the one that is going to increase state and local partnerships with federal authorities to work on this common mission.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll end with this. Do not allow the left to gaslight you. Secure borders are normal. I have someone that has deployed all over the world. Every other country would never behave and allow 20 million people to enter their country illegally. That's not normal. So thank God we're going to get back to normalcy, and thank you all for leading our charge. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Knott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Witnesses, thank you for being here. Before I ask any questions, let me state from a first-person perspective that I had the privilege of serving under both the Biden and the Trump administrations. I was a federal prosecutor who focused exclusively on organized crime. And the idea that both administrations were committed to applying the law as it relates to both organized crime and specifically how illegal immigration infested organized crime is laughable. It's demonstrably not true. On day one of the Biden's Department of Justice in 2021, prosecutors that I worked with who had been exclusively assigned to prosecuting illegal reentries and immigration offenses, those individuals were either reassigned or let go. Many of them are no longer with the Department of Justice. And this tracks when you look at the number of illegal reentries. So these are people who were removed after having been convicted of a crime and then come back a second time. The number of those prosecutions, the number of those sentences and convictions decreased precipitously under the Biden administration, despite millions and millions more illegal crossers. Secondly, this bureaucratic and administrative effect that I saw from the prosecutor side, it applied equally to the law enforcement side. I'm sure you know, sir, from your contact with the Border Patrol, with DEA, with ATF, and other federal law enforcement, that these bureaucratic hurdles made it very difficult to investigate, to prosecute, to even submit cases that dealt with illegal immigration. For whatever reason, it was flatly deprioritized in terms of a law enforcement mechanism that the Department of Justice was unable to bring these cases to the grand jury to charge them and to work them over the last 4 years. Now, I wanted to go and ask a few questions. Ms. Vaughan, you specifically mentioned just now that there was very little disincentivizing illegal immigration. Can you expand on that, just broadly speaking? Were there any disincentives to any person who wanted to cross illegally into the United States over the last 4 years?
No, people understood that if they could make it to the U.S. border, that they almost certainly were going to be released into the country, possibly issued a work permit, and would not expect any threat of removal or consequences for their illegal entry for the foreseeable future.
Mr. Newman, were there any disincentives that you saw over the last 4 years implemented by the Biden administration specifically to disincentivize illegal immigration?
No, not many at all. As Jessica just mentioned, Mrs. Vaughan just mentioned, the getting parole, like those are obvious incentives to coming in, but also, as was mentioned before, deprioritizing illegal immigration crimes meant people knew they could just come in and basically vanish into the country, and they did. That's why we have more illegal aliens in the country now than we did 4 years ago.
And isn't it true, sir, that the border does have vast swaths of the mileage that were unsupervised by order by the Border Patrol? And that emanated from Washington, obviously, but it was implemented with huge holes in the border.
Yes.
And so therefore, it's entirely foreseeable that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions potentially, could have come across the border without contact.
Yes.
Ms. Vaughan, I want to talk to you about how the cartels exploited these loopholes. Over the last 4 years, the price of drugs, in many respects, have gone down precipitously. That's an increase of supply. I saw this in my job. How have cartels exploited the open border of the last 4 years?
Well, they've reaped enormous revenue from it, something like $13 billion a year.
That's just known, by the way.
Right.
Yes.
They have enticed migrants because, they could confidently assure their customers that they would succeed in getting into the U.S. And then often they hooked them up with jobs and told them that they would have to pay off the remainder of their smuggling fee by giving back some of the wages that they were earning, all determined by the cartel, pay for housing, transportation, food, all kinds of other expenses they have in what was a debt bondage or labor trafficking situation. That's how they took advantage of these people.
And that's still going on right now.
Oh, absolutely.
That infrastructure's in place.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And that leads to more or less dangerous crime.
Oh, more and more.
More or
crime.
less gang violence.
One of the ways that they can get people to pay off their debt is to participate in drug trafficking.
More or less overdose deaths.
More.
And sir, briefly, can you describe the impact on local, non-federal law enforcement that these open border policies have had?
It's made it so it's very hard for local law enforcement to respond to anything. They're focused on so many more additional crimes. When the Cato Institute says that illegal immigrants commit half less than U.S. citizens, it doesn't matter how much they're committing. It's adding to what local law enforcement has to respond to.
Right. Gentleman's time has expired.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Onder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I do have some questions, but at first, I wanted to address some absurdities to which this committee was treated today. First, we have the absurdity from Ranking Member Raskin that somehow the 2024 Senate immigration bill was the solution to our border crisis. No one believes that. It failed because it was a lousy bill. It was an amnesty bill. In fact, it was such a bad bill that it failed to pass. Somehow, the idea that House Republicans are responsible for its demise is absurd because it failed in the Senate 43-50, including 6 Democrats voting no. Meanwhile, the Senate Democrats refused to take up a real border security bill, H.R. 2. Secondly, the absurdity that somehow anchor babies should have birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. And yes, I said it, anchor babies, because that is the appropriate term. These babies serve as anchors to prevent deportation of illegal aliens. As was said earlier, the 14th Amendment involved slaves after the Civil War to prevent Democrat Southerners from depriving those freed slaves of their civil rights. And this idea of birthright citizenship for anchor babies was invented out of whole cloth in a footnote, dicta, not even the actual decision by Justice Brannon in 1982. So I applaud President Trump for that executive order. And then finally, the absurdity that somehow things were better under President Biden than under President Trump. You know, I think it's nice that our libertarian friends at Cato remind us that illegal aliens pay some taxes. That's nice. But I would also remind that the great libertarian economist Milton Friedman once famously said, you cannot have a welfare state and open borders. Those illegal aliens cost us in healthcare expenses, in education expenses, and of course in social welfare expenses, and devastate those programs. Mr. Fabbricatore, I'm a medical doctor. I practiced medicine for 30 years. In the early years of my practice, we worried a lot about drugs in terms of overprescription of narcotics by physicians, and we worried about meth dealers making methamphetamine out of Sudafed, often in rural areas. Today, though, we have 100,000 deaths from fentanyl, the great majority of it crossing our southern border. And then, and a lot of people forget this, 50,000 deaths from methamphetamine. It's not made in a trailer in rural Missouri anymore. It's made in Mexico and comes across our southern border. Could you, this is kind of a follow-up question to the question Representative Nod asked Ms. Vaughan. How has our porous border contributed to the drug problem in the United States?
Yeah, look, the cartel's all about profit. So if they can make a profit in the United States, they're going to make sure that they do so. With the fentanyl that we've had coming in, it's been a boon to the cartels. It's been a boon. They don't care that 100,000 United States citizens are dying every year. That's a cost of business to them. And we should be going after the cartels for poisoning our United States citizens. We're losing 100,000 people a year just off this one drug, and we've done nothing about it this last 4 years. Well, I think that's going to stop now, and we're going to go directly after the cartels for killing our United States citizens.
The cartel leaders are terrorists. I think Trump's executive order makes them eligible for the Soleimani treatment. Ms. Vaughan, you I think touched most on the idea of visa abuse. In my district in Missouri, an illegal alien, once while driving an Uber, once while driving a Lyft, sexually assaulted 2 young women in my district. Now, he was a tourist visa overstayer. Is there anything we can do to crack down on this very common source of illegal immigration, which is coming legally but then overstaying a visa?
Yes, there are a number of things, not one silver bullet, but if we take away the ability of people to work here, that's a disincentive to overstay. But we can also lean on the State Department or enact requirements for them to adjust their visa issuance protocols to address high overstay rates. And ICE needs to do more enforcement on overstays, frankly. And I would also like to see a way to hold the sponsors of some of these visa holders responsible for too much overstaying.
Very good.
Gentleman's
Thank you.
time has expired. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for conducting this hearing. To kick off this Congress, there is no more important subject than the security of our nation and of moving away from these horrific policies that have abandoned that security in the name of political correctness or in the name of some sort of social engineering or in the name of political expediency. I've been listening to this discussion today, and it strikes me that perhaps Washington does what so many Americans thinks Washington can do, which is talk ceaselessly about things that have little connection to their actual lives. Over the past 12 years, I led a state law enforcement agency in my home state of Kansas. I've been thinking on this dais about cases we actually worked, thinking about a case in which a young man, I think he was 26, was running drugs for the cartels. He was driving north on a U.S. highway. He was stopped by an Oklahoma law enforcement officer. He panicked. He shot the officer in the head. By the grace of God, the officer is still alive to this day. He then came across the border where our officers stopped his vehicle with stop sticks. He fled on foot. He carjacked the vehicle of an old man in the middle of the night. He fled in a high-speed pursuit up the highway in Kansas. He realized he was going to be caught. He pulled over to the side of the highway. He invaded a home. By the grace of God, nobody was home. He then shot at our officers, and I had a lengthy discussion with my counterpart in Oklahoma over who got to prosecute him first. We both sent him to prison for the rest of his life under our respective state laws. I'm thinking about a case in Johnson County, Kansas, where an illegal alien in this country was drunk one night, and he struck and killed a sheriff's deputy who had done nothing but his job. He'd pulled over a citizen who was driving erratically on the side of the highway, and the drunken driver, who never should have been in this country, killed that young man. I attended his funeral. I'm thinking about a case in a very small county in north central Kansas where an illegal alien came to this country, raped a child, and we sent him to prison for the rest of his life under the laws of the state of Kansas, not because he was an illegal alien, but because he raped a child in our state. I'm thinking about a case in northwest Kansas where where an illegal alien came in a very small county and murdered his domestic partner. We sent him to prison for the rest of his life. I'm thinking about a case in southwest Kansas where the same thing happened. An illegal alien joined up with some lawfully present citizens, stole a car, and then decided to kill the witness, and we wound up sending that individual to prison for the rest of his life. And that's just the cases I can think of sitting here that we handled at a state level in a state where the vast majority of criminal activity is handled by local authorities, not by the state of Kansas. Think of the volume that we're talking about here and how offensive it is to those victims and their families to say, statistically, illegal aliens don't kill people at a higher rate than anybody who actually lives here. Give me a break. So I have a couple of questions for you. I'd like to know, obviously we've talked a great deal about how enforcement priorities and policy priorities in this town affect cooperation and interactive out in the real world where federal law enforcement actually work with state law enforcement, and they're not getting orders out of this town. They do their jobs in order to keep our communities safe and don't worry so much about who is doing what. They just want to get the job done. It certainly works that way in my state of Kansas. And yet we fight with folks in this town all the way from the operational level. I'm thinking of a briefing that was canceled where I was supposed to go get a briefing from ICE, and folks in this town ordered the local agents not to talk to us because I was a Republican. And we weren't supposed to get access to that information from line enforcement officers. All the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm thinking of a case we argued and actually won back in 2020 that allowed states to prosecute illegal aliens who commit crimes under the jurisdiction of our state. Were not preempted. So here's my questions for you, and I'll go to Mr. Fabbricatore because he has operational law enforcement experience. As we figure out what we can actually agree on here that can make a difference, should we or should we not explore the idea of expanding cooperation between local and state law enforcement on the one hand and federal law enforcement on the other?
Yeah, Congressman Schmidt, absolutely. Look, working with federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, county level, all levels of law enforcement makes the United States safer. When we're able to join together and cooperate, we only make the communities safer.
And what about state and local prosecutors on the one hand, or federal prosecutors on the other hand? There are thousands of state and local prosecutors who encounter the vast majority of criminal aliens, very few federal authorities. Should we work on expanding cooperation between federal and state prosecuting authorities?
Yes, absolutely. Any work that we can do together is going to make sure that we can make sure that we're going after criminals.
And so too with respect to state courts, where the vast majority of these crimes are prosecuted. Should we work on expanding the ability of state courts to assist us in enforcing our immigration laws?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nothing excites me more than the thought of President Trump initiating the largest deportation operation in American history. I'd like to remind the committee that the purpose of our immigration system is for the benefit of American citizens, not foreigners or anybody else. For the past 4 years, Democrats have facilitated the invasion of over 10 million illegal aliens into our country. Open borders grow the welfare state, they depress American wages, strain our education and healthcare system, price our working class out of owning a home, and flood our communities with violence and drugs. Mr. Bier, and as well as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, you're intellectualizing about illegal alien crime notwithstanding. I'd like to remind you that the correct number of American citizens murdered or raped by illegal aliens is 0. Americans have learned firsthand that importing the third world will turn America into the third world. So in light of the chaos of the past 4 years, the question that has come up earlier is, why are our Democrat colleagues so determined to flood our country with millions of illegal aliens? And I'd like to suggest that perhaps it's because they benefit from it politically. Remember that every state is apportioned congressional seats based on population, not based on citizenship. Counting non-citizens in congressional apportionment has resulted in more seats for blue states and fewer congressional seats for red states. For instance, excluding non-citizens, California would have an estimated 3 fewer congressional seats, and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, traditionally red states, would each have an estimated 1 additional seat. Right now, in a political environment where Republicans have a 2-seat majority in the House of Representatives, the presence of millions of illegal aliens in America could quite literally change the balance of power in our country. But the problem doesn't stop at congressional apportionment. The ultimate goal of mass illegal immigration is mass amnesty and citizenship for illegal aliens, which of course means ultimately allowing them to vote. And that's not a conspiracy theory either. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer himself said it just 2 years ago, and I'm quoting him, "Our ultimate goal is to help the dreamers but get a path to citizenship for all 11 million, or however many undocumented there are here." That is their words, not mine. And it appears that for the past 4 years, providing a path to citizenship for illegal aliens is precisely what the Biden administration has been doing. Ms. Vaughan, thanks for being here. Can you explain how through various programs the Biden administration, either via lax enforcement or through facilitating abuse, has provided a path to citizenship for illegal aliens?
Well, the main way that has occurred, or at least the most significant, are these programs that allow people who have made it into the country to obtain a status and a work permit, some of which do put them on the path to getting a green card. For example, there's the OPT program, which allows either foreign nationals who've attended U.S. schools or who've enrolled in one of these bogus strip mall schools that enables them to get a work permit through the OPT program. That is meant to be, for many of them, a bridge to another more permanent guest worker program, such as H-1B, because once they get the H-1B, then they can continue to extend that. There are also programs like the U and the T visas, which start with a work permit, and eventually, once they're adjudicated, without much review, allow them to receive a green card, which is a path to citizenship. There are others, including temporary protected status, which are like a de facto permanent status at this point because they're never rescinded. This is, and these are not small. We're talking about probably about 2 million people who are in these kind of quasi-legal programs that get to stay here and be considered constituents.
So 2 million people who have a path to citizenship right now. This isn't a theoretical or a hypothetical problem. This is happening right now. The political party that has nothing to offer voters but inflation, censorship, and transgenderism is weaponizing mass illegal immigration to their own political benefit. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. And I'll yield myself 5 minutes for questions. I think we've come to an agreement on at least one point, and that is that our immigration laws are broken. The Democrats think they're broken because they don't stop presidents like Trump from securing our borders. The Republicans think they're broken because they don't stop presidents like Biden from opening our borders. I think the most illuminating testimony that we've had today came from the Democrats' witness, who opined that the enforcement of our immigration laws was vastly better under Biden than it is under Trump. That is a difference of opinion that we periodically resolve through our elections. And from the last election, it is very clear that the American people agree with us, and they have given us the responsibility and the authority to change these laws so that they can never again be evaded and mocked by a future Democratic administration. Ms. Vaughan, I want to begin with the abuse of our asylum process, which I think is one of the biggest problems that we face. We all know the vast majority of asylum claims turn out to be bogus, but under the Biden administration, just making that claim got you immediate admittance into our country, a lot of free stuff. You were assured that your claim wouldn't be heard for many years, and once it was rejected and you were ordered by a court deported, that order wouldn't be enforced. Obviously, Remain in Mexico took a lot of the incentive out of making these false claims, and of course, one of President Trump's first orders reinstates that policy. But it seems to me we need to assure the permanence of that policy, and we also need to be clear that asylum is reserved for those who've been singled out by their own government for persecution because of their religion, race, or political views. And under international law, once you have crossed that first international border, you have now separated yourself from that government. You have the right to apply for asylum in that country that you first crossed into. You do not have the right to pass through 5 other countries because you want free stuff from Americans. And it also seems to me that if you break our laws to enter our country, you should forfeit any claim to asylum because you've already expressed your intention to disobey our laws. What do we need to do to reinstate these principles and assure that future presidents can't circumvent them?
Well, the asylum system is one of the biggest loopholes in our immigration law right now that's routinely exploited. That's why we need legislation to actually codify provisions to address the problems that you've mentioned. For example, to make it clear that you must enter through a legal port of entry, that you're not going to qualify for asylum if you've passed through a safe third country, or if you could have relocated within your own country. We're getting a lot of people at our border now who've been firmly resettled in other countries before coming here to take advantage of the open border and the parole policies.
So are those principles missing from our current asylum law and we need to place them in it, or are they simply being ignored?
They are really, the clarification is missing. I think that there are different ways you could interpret our law, but they're not going to be as effective. We need H.R. 2 closed a lot of those loopholes.
Your guidance on what else needs to be done to assure that this doesn't happen again would be much appreciated. Mr. Fabbricatore, the sanctuary policies, what do those laws do exactly?
They don't protect American citizens. They protect criminal aliens. And we've seen that happen in the U.S. with the rise of Tren de Aragua in these sanctuary cities.
Well, in fact, it's the immigrant community from which they arise that is the most victimized by them, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I think that a family at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York is far more likely to be preyed upon by these cartels and criminal gangs than somebody living in Scarsdale, for example.
Initially, they prey on their own, sir, yes.
So what can we do about these sanctuary jurisdictions?
Well, we need to look at any kind of defunding that we can do. And look, we need to make sure that ICE is going into these communities and they can work with local law enforcement. If we're really serious about keeping American citizens safe, we have to be serious about letting law enforcement work together to keep American citizens safe. And that's not going to happen as long as we have these sanctuary jurisdictions that don't allow local law enforcement to give information to ICE. Sanctuary jurisdiction in Colorado, probation cannot even let ICE know when somebody gets taken out of jail and put on probation. So that's someone that's convicted of a crime that's going out onto the street, and that probation officer cannot let ICE know when they're going on probation.
Mr. Newman, my time is about to expire, but I would like to ask you to put in a response regarding the TPS and parole abuses of the past administration and what we can do to assure that that's never done again. But I am now out of time, so if you could give that to us in writing, we will pay very close attention to it. With that, I believe we are ready to conclude today's hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing. I think this was a very illuminating hearing on both sides. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional material for the record. And with that, and without objection, the hearing is adjourned.